Warning: the views and opinions expressed by these hosts do not necessarily reflect those of Area 52 Media Group or Area 52 TV. Simply put, these guys could be jerks sometimes. Hey everybody, welcome to a special edition of Nerd Talk. It's called The Political Nerd. It's going to be a brand new show that we're bringing to you, but we're going to do it on Nerd Talk tonight because I'm a glutton for punishment and I want to make everybody mad. So we're going to be watching the vice presidential debate tonight. And I've got a special guest, Captain Guns. He's coming on. And we are going to be actually watching it and commenting live. And I'm hoping to get all of you guys' I want you to comment. I want you to think it's okay to give me, and then we will read off comments. So we're going to bring in our guest, and we're going to be so we can talk to Jeremy and get everybody ready to go. Hey, Jeremy, what's up?
Hey, not much. Glad to be here.
So are you ready to make half of America mad?
I am.
Because you know that's what's going to happen, right?
That's exactly right. Well, it's going to seem like we're going to make most of America mad, but I think the majority will be on our side.
I would think so. But, you know, it's one of those things. By the way, I'm not being distracted. Oh, I've got to move a little bit. I'm not trying to be too distracted, but I've got to get this all put out there so everybody out there can go, hey, yeah, we're like you guys, blah, 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 right? Mm-hmm. And so I'm coming from a position of I'm an independent, right? I got to move myself. And I have voted in the past. I have voted for Democrats. I have in the past voted for Republicans. I've also actually in the past voted for Libertarians because they just made more sense. So that's where I'm coming from. And I want to know that, you know, and yes, I've already made my decision who I'm voting for. And this has nothing to do with what or who I'm going to vote for. What about you guys?
Yeah, this, for me at least, I feel like this debate, it's going to be like the last one. It's going to be more of the same. It's just going to send people in the direction that they're already heading. I feel like even if you feel like you're still not that made up on this election, everyone's leaning a side, even if you're not made up, and whatever side you're already leaning, I feel like this will probably just push you harder in that direction. But who knows? Maybe there'll be a couple surprises.
Right? You know, it may just change everyone's mind. What do you think, Jeremy?
I mean, there's probably very few undecideds out there. And the undecideds are already leaning one way or another. And I agree that it's just going to push them to that direction. But it's going to be great entertainment value tonight, I think. There's probably not going to be a lot of policy talk. Nobody's going to have real answers for real questions. And it's going to be entertaining, that's for sure.
Mm-hmm. That's what I'm thinking. So I don't know. I'm really hoping that this is going to go well tonight. People might like what we say, and people might like not what we not say. You know what I'm saying? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I know exactly what you're saying. My shirt's bothering me here.
Shirt's bothering you? So our boy over there is going to be watching the live. So we're taking a feed with Fox, right? So that's who we're going to rely on tonight, and just to see how it's going to go. And of course, he's going to be watching the screen to make sure that when they go into live, that we're going to catch it in whole 9 yards. So, Jeremy, I'm going to ask you, and you're in a business that is highly regulated. I mean,
yes,
like
it is
super regulated, right? And
yep.
What have you seen, and what do you feel in the last 3 years has where America's gone?
There's been a lot of talk about stiffing the gun laws and gun regulations, but there really hasn't been a lot of activity about making it happen.
Right.
And this is an odd election year to where we haven't seen a huge spike in sales. Usually this time during an election year, everybody's going scared that the Democrats or the liberals are going to take all the guns away if they win, and everybody goes on a buying frenzy. But that's not the case right now. Every gun shop I talk to, because I talked to a lot of gun shops with our business, with the auction and the Sericam shotguns, and everybody's sales are slow, and everybody's just waiting. When's that election cycle business going to come in? And it
Right.
hasn't. Everybody's tightening up on their purse strings, and guns are not necessarily. Everybody's got their self-defense guns,
Right.
you know.
So,
So
The
so do
debate
you?
is
It's-
live if you want to cut to it.
Yep, let's go ahead. Let's bring that on. Let's get it going.
Understanding that our allies matter. When our allies see Donald Trump turn towards Vladimir Putin, turn towards North Korea, when we start to see that type of fickleness around holding the coalitions together, we will stay committed. And as the Vice President said today is, we will protect our forces and our allied forces, and there will be consequences.
Governor, your time is up. Senator Vance, the same question. Would you support or oppose a preemptive strike by Israel on Iran? You have 2 minutes.
So, Margaret, I want to answer the question. First of all, thanks, Governor. Thanks to CBS for hosting the debate. And thanks, most importantly, to the American people who are watching this evening and caring enough about this country to pay attention to this vice presidential debate. I want to answer the question, but I want to actually give an introduction to myself a little bit because I recognize a lot of Americans don't know who either one of us are. I was raised in a working-class family. My mother required food assistance for periods of her life. My grandmother required Social Security help to raise me, and she raised me in part because my own mother struggled with addiction for a big chunk of my early life.
Move that arrow off the
I
screen,
went to
please.
college on the GI Bill after I enlisted in the Marine Corps and served in Iraq. And so I stand here asking to be your vice president with extraordinary gratitude for this country, for the American dream that made it possible for me to live my dreams. And most importantly, I know that a lot of you are worried about the chaos in the world and the feeling that the American dream is unattainable. I want to try to convince you tonight over the next 90 minutes that if we get better leadership in the White House, if we get Donald Trump back in the White House, the American dream is going to be attainable once again. Now, to answer this particular question, we have to remember that as much as Governor Walz just accused Donald Trump of being an agent of chaos, Donald Trump actually delivered stability in the world, and he did it by establishing effective deterrence. People were afraid of stepping out of line. Iran, which launched this attack, has received over $100 billion in unfrozen assets thanks to the Kamala Harris administration. What do they use that money for? They use it to buy weapons that they're now launching against our allies, and God forbid, potentially launching against the United States as well. Donald Trump recognized that for people to fear the United States, you needed peace through strength. They needed to recognize that if they got out of line, the United States global leadership would put stability and peace back in the world. Now, you asked about a preemptive strike, Margaret, and I want to answer the question. Look, it is up to Israel what they think they need to do to keep their country safe, and we should support our allies wherever they are when they're fighting the bad guys. I think that's the right approach to take with the Israel question.
Thank you, Senator. Governor Walz, do you care to respond to any of the allegations?
Well, look, Donald Trump was in office. We'll sometimes hear a revisionist history, but when Donald Trump was in office, it was Donald Trump who we had a coalition of nations that had boxed Iran's nuclear program in, the inability to advance it. Donald Trump pulled that program and put nothing else in its place. So Iran is closer to a nuclear weapon than they were before because of Donald Trump's fickle leadership. And when Iran shot down an American aircraft in international
They ever going to
airspace,
bring back
Donald
the
Trump
real
tweeted,
life
because that's
crowds, like
standard
get the
diplomacy
reactions and
Donald
everything of
Trump.
a live
And
crowd?
when Iranian
Not anymore.
missiles did
Nope.
fall near U.S. troops and they received traumatic brain injuries, Donald Trump wrote it off.
unless
as a headache.
the
Look, our
the
allies
public
understand
opinion changes
Donald
toward
Trump is fickle.
the blue,
Whoever has
Right.
then they'll bring it back because it's the
makes sense to
benefit
him.
for them to bring it back.
Steady
Yep.
leadership like
Right
you
now, it's not a
witnessed today,
benefit.
like you witnessed in April. Both Iranian attacks were repelled. Our coalition is strong, and we need the steady leadership that Kamala Harris is providing.
Senator Vance, the U.S. did have a diplomatic deal with Iran to temporarily pause parts of its nuclear program, and President Trump did exit that deal. He recently said, just 5 days ago, the U.S. must now make a diplomatic deal with Iran because the consequences are impossible. Did he make a mistake? You have 1 minute.
Well, first of all, Margaret, diplomacy is not a dirty word, but I think that's something that Governor Walz just said is quite extraordinary. You yourself just said Iran is as close to a nuclear weapon today as they have ever been. And Governor Walz, you blamed Donald Trump. Who has been the vice president for the last 3.5 years? And the answer is your running mate, not mine. Donald Trump consistently made the world more secure. Now, we talk about the sequence of events that led us to where we are right now, and you can't ignore October the 7th, which I appreciate Governor Waltz bringing up. But when did Iran and Hamas and their proxies attack Israel? It was during the administration of Kamala Harris. So Governor Waltz can criticize Donald
That's right.
Trump's tweets.
Couple
but effective,
couple hours ago.
smart
Yep.
diplomacy and peace through strength is how you bring stability back to a very broken world.
My business partner is Jewish from Israel, and his parents called, let him know that the sirens are going off, and then they called when the bombs were going off.
Only answer is during the 4 years that Donald
Of
Trump.
course, we didn't hear anything about it.
Gentlemen, we have a
In the
lot
news.
to get to. Nora?
Margaret, thank you.
Thank you.
Now to Hurricane Helene.
Thank you.
Tough time to get a voice crack.
Right.
More than 160 people.
That's because they're not drinking Moon Pie coffee.
missing. Scientists say climate change makes these hurricanes larger,
Climate
stronger,
change.
Climate change is such a load of
because the
shit.
Historic rainfall. Senator Vance, according to CBS News polling, 7 in 10 Americans and more than 60% of Republicans under the age of 45 favor the U.S. taking steps to try and reduce climate change. Senator, what responsibility would the Trump administration have to try and reduce the impact of climate change? I'll give you 2 minutes.
Sure. So first of all, let's start with the hurricane because it's an unbelievable, unspeakable human tragedy. I just saw today actually a photograph of 2 grandparents on a roof with a 6-year-old child, and it was the last photograph ever taken of them because the roof collapsed and those innocent people lost their lives. And I'm sure Governor Waltz joins me in saying our hearts go out to those innocent people, our prayers go out to them, and we want as robust and aggressive as a federal response as we can get to save as many lives as possible, and then, of course, afterwards, to help the people in those communities rebuild. I mean, these are communities that I love. Some of them I know very personally in Appalachia, all across the Southeast. They need their government to do their job, and I commit that when Donald Trump is president again, the government will put the citizens of this country first when they suffer from a disaster. Now, Nora, you asked about climate change. I think this is a very important issue. Look, a lot of people are justifiably worried about all these crazy weather patterns. I think it's important for us, first of all, to say Donald Trump and I support clean air, clean water. We want the environment to be cleaner and safer. But one of the things that I've noticed some of our Democratic friends talking a lot about is a concern about carbon emissions, this idea that carbon emissions drives all of the climate change. Well, let's just say that's true, just for the sake of argument, so we're not arguing about weird science. Let's just say that's true. Well, if you believe that, what would you want to do? The answer is that you'd want to reshore as much American manufacturing as possible, and you'd want to produce as much energy as possible in the United States of America because we're the cleanest economy in the entire world. What have Kamala Harris's policies actually led to? More energy production in China, more manufacturing overseas, more doing business in some of the dirtiest parts of the entire world. And when I say that, I mean the amount of carbon emissions they're doing per unit of economic output. So if we actually care about getting cleaner air and cleaner water, the best thing to do is to double down and invest in American workers and the American people. And unfortunately, Kamala Harris has done exactly the opposite.
Governor Walz, you have 2 minutes to respond.
Well, we got close to an agreement because all those things are happening. Look, first of all, it is a horrific tragedy,
Close to an
with
agreement.
this hurricane, and
They're
my heart
close.
goes out to the
Yeah.
folks that are down there. In contact with the governors, I serve as co-chair of the Council of Governors as we work together on these emergency managements. Governors know no partisanship; they work together. So all of the governors and the emergency responders are on the ground. Those happen on the front end. The federal government comes in, makes sure they're there to that we recover, but we're still in that phase where we need to make sure that they're staying there, staying focused. Now, look, coming back to the climate change issue, there's no doubt this thing roared onto the scene faster and stronger than anything we've seen. Senator Vance has said that there's a climate problem in the past. Donald Trump called it a hoax and then joked
It is a
that things
hoax.
would make more beachfront.
Most
It is a
of
hoax.
the climate damage
What we've seen
happened
out of
more in like the
Bayer's,
80s and 70s
administration,
with the
now
old
Biden's
cars. Once they
administration, is
switched
we've seen
over,
this
a lot of
investment.
that
We've seen massive investments,
started
the biggest in
dissipating.
Nope.
global history that we've seen in
Nope.
the Inflation Reduction Act. has
The
created
trees,
jobs all across
the
country.
amount of trees that we have on this planet now
Taking
negate
the technology
anything
we invented
that we put
and
out.
making it here. 200,000 jobs.
In Australia alone,
The largest solar
they've already
manufacturing
proven it.
plant in North America sits in Minnesota. But my farmers know climate change
The
is real. They've seen
The worst hurricane season on record is 2005, almost 20 years ago.
Yep.
Adapting and
04 and 05, we had
and-
them stacked up, one after another.
soybean
Yeah.
harvest wind.
And before that, it was 1960 and 1961.
Oil at
And
We're also producing
1780 still holds the record for the worst disaster and deaths of a hurricane,
that climate change is real.
with
Reducing
25,000 people, I think it was, or something.
critical, but this is not a false choice.
Now, granted, that
you
was
can do that at the same time you're creating the jobs that we're seeing all across
didn't have
the
the
country.
technology they had today
This
with
administration
warnings
has
and
done.
everything else.
We are
But
seeing
Yep.
us becoming an energy
There have been some
superpower for the
record-breaking
future, not just
temperatures,
the
though, in the
current. And
last
that's
couple
what
years
absolutely
in
makes
some
sense.
areas.
And then we start thinking about
Play devil's
how do
advocate.
we mitigate these
So-
disasters.
Yeah.
Thank you. Senator,
And it's on
Vance,
both
you have
directions,
opportunity
too.
to respond.
Yes.
The governor mentioned that President Trump has called
That's true.
climate
More
change a
extreme
hoax.
cold
Do you agree?
and heat.
Well, look, what the president has said is that if the Democrats, in particular Kamala Harris and her leadership, if they really believe that climate change is serious, what they would be doing is more manufacturing and more energy production in the United States of America, and that's not what they're doing. So clearly, Kamala Harris herself doesn't believe her own rhetoric on this. If she did, she would actually agree with Donald Trump's energy policies. Now, something Governor Walz said I think is important to touch upon, because when we talk about clean energy, I think that's a slogan that often the Democrats will use here. And I'm talking, of course, about the Democratic leadership. And the real issue is that if you're spending hundreds of millions or even billions of dollars of American taxpayer money on solar panels that are made in China, number one, you're going to make the economy dirtier. We should be making more of those solar panels here in the United
are in
States of
Minnesota.
America. Some of them are, Tim, but a lot of them are being made overseas in China, especially the components that go into those solar panels. So if you really want to make the environment cleaner, you've got to invest in more energy production. We haven't built a nuclear facility, I think, one in the past 40 years.
Senator.
Natural gas, we got to invest
Tim
more in
Walz
it.
looks a little
Kamala
shook,
Harris has done the
honestly.
opposite.
Yeah, he does, doesn't he?
Energy prices, and also meant that we're doing
Senator,
worse
your
by the
time
climate.
is up. Governor, would you like to respond?
Well, look, we're producing more natural gas than we ever have. There's no moratorium on that. We're producing more oil. But the folks know, and like I said again, these are not liberal folks. These are not folks that are Green New Deal folks. These are farmers that have been drought one year, massive flooding the next year. They understand that it makes sense. Look, our number one export cannot be topsoil from erosion from these massive storms. We saw it in Minnesota this summer. And thinking about how do we respond to that, we're thinking ahead on this. And what Kamala Harris has been able to do in Minnesota, we're starting to weatherproof some of these things. The infrastructure law that was passed allows us to think about mitigation in the future. How do we make sure that we're protecting by burying our power lines? How do we make sure that we're protecting lakefronts and things that we're seeing more and more of? But to call it a hoax and to take the oil company executives to Mar-a-Lago, say, give me money for my campaign and I'll let you do whatever you want. We can be smarter about that. And in all of
That's not what happened.
Exactly what she's doing, creating
Not at
jobs
all.
right here.
Governor, your time is up. The overwhelming consensus among scientists is that the Earth's climate is warming at an unprecedented rate. Margaret?
Thank you, Nora. We're going to turn now to immigration. The crisis at the U.S.-Mexico
Was that a
border
little,
consistently ranks as one
bit
of the
thin?
top issues
Yeah,
for
right.
American voters. Senator Vance, your campaign.
We're not looking for their opinion.
The largest mass deportation
Right.
plan in American history.
And that
to
that
use
report
the
goes
US
both
military
ways.
to do so.
I just put one in our
Could you be
chat
more specific about
that shows it
exactly
goes
how
both
this will
ways.
work? For example, would you deport parents who have entered the U.S. illegally and separate them from any of their children?
have a chat
who were
somewhere?
born on U.S. soil?
On Facebook.
You have 2 minutes.
So first of all, Margaret, before
The
we
Nerd
get to
Talk.
deportations, we have to stop the
I'll send
bleeding.
it to
We're
you.
in a historic immigration crisis because Kamala Harris started and said that she wanted to undo all of Donald Trump's border policies. 94 executive orders suspending deportations, decriminalizing illegal aliens, massively increasing the asylum fraud that exists in our system. That has opened the floodgates. And what it's meant is that a lot of
I wouldn't split them up. I'd send them all
I
back.
had a mother who struggled with opioid addiction and has gotten clean.
That's right.
If they came over with kids, send them back with kids.
To be deprived of their second chance because Kamala Harris led.
Well, they need to traffic those kids. 300,000 kids are missing.
Right?
The bleeding. You've got to re-implement Donald
Just
Trump's
because they were separated, they should have been sent back together. And
re-implement deportations, and that gets me to your point, Margaret, about what do we actually do?
and let's face it,
We've got 20,
parents
25
use their kids to get over here too.
country.
Yes.
What do we do with them? I think
Which
the
is
first thing that we do is we
not
start
right
with
at
the
all.
criminal migrants. About 1 million of those people have committed some form of crime in addition to crossing the border illegally. I think you start with deportations on those folks. And then I think you make it harder for illegal aliens to undercut the wages of American workers. A lot of people will go home if they can't work for less than minimum wage in our own country. And by the way, that'll be really good for our workers who just want to earn a fair wage for doing a good day's work. And the final point, Margaret, is you ask about family separation. Right now in this country, Margaret, we have 320,000 children that the Department of Homeland Security has effectively lost. Some of them have been sex trafficked. Some of them hopefully are at homes with their families. Some of them have been used as drug trafficking mules. The real family separation policy in this country is unfortunately Kamala Harris's wide open southern border. And I'd ask my fellow Americans to remember, when she came into office, she said she was going to do this. Real leadership would be saying, you know what, I screwed up. We're going to go back to Donald Trump's border policies. I wish that she would do that. It would be good for all of us.
Governor, do you care to respond to any of those specific allegations, including that
Of course
the
he
Vice
does.
President is, quote, letting in fentanyl and using kids as drug mules, among other things regarding children?
The drug mule is not true, but I will say about this, about the fentanyl, because this is a crisis of this, the opioid crisis.
How
And
does
the
he
good
know?
news on this is the last 12 months saw the
Right?
largest decrease
I
in
said,
opioid
no, not
deaths in
true.
our nation's
Can't be
history.
true.
30% decrease in Ohio, but there's still more work to do. But let's go back to this on immigration. Kamala Harris was the Attorney General of the largest state in
Borders are.
California. She's the only person in this race
Borders are.
prosecuted transnational gangs for human trafficking and drug interventions. But look, we all want to solve this. Most of us want to solve this, and that is the United States Congress. That's the Border Patrol agents. That's the Chamber of Commerce. That's most Americans out here. That's why we had the fairest and the toughest bill on immigration that this nation's seen. It was crafted by a conservative senator from Oklahoma, James Lankford. I know him. He's super conservative, but he's a man of principle, wants to get it done. Democrats and Republicans worked on this piece of legislation. The Border Patrol said, this is what we need in here. These are the experts. And the Chamber of Commerce and the Wall Street Journal said, pass this thing. Kamala Harris helped get there. 1,500 new border agents, detection for drugs, DOJ money to speed up these the adjudications on this, just what America wants. But as soon as I was getting ready to pass and actually tackle this, Donald Trump said no, told them to vote against it because it gives him a campaign issue. It gives him to, what would Donald Trump
No,
do?
because there was too much fat in it.
And they need
I do
I was just
remember
gonna say
that
there's a bunch of other junk.
Yeah, there's a
Just do
lot
this
of
through the
other
executive
stuff in
branch.
that, not
So
just
look, we have
the border
options to do
stuff.
this. Donald Trump had 4 years. He had 4 years to
If
do
they
this.
had just border stuff, they would have passed it. But they
Yep.
added a bunch of, and that's how these oddball laws and oddball funding get done. Is they add them to bills that we need, and it's like, okay, do we give up this to get this? And it becomes a,
people.
you know, how much is it going to cost us to get what we really need?
At one point, Senator Vance said it was so unworkable to be laughable. So that's where we're at. Pass the bill, she'll sign
It was laughable.
Governor, your time is up.
He's still
Senator,
saying
the
pass that
question
bill.
was,
Maybe it
will
needs
you
to be
separate
revised a
parents
little.
from their children,
It's not passing
even if
yet.
their kids are U.S. citizens? You have 1
Not
minute.
just pass
My
a bill
point
to
is that
pass
we
a
already
bill.
have massive child separations thanks to Kamala Harris's open border. And I didn't accuse Kamala Harris of inviting drug mules. I said that she enabled the Mexican drug cartels
That's
to
right.
operate freely in this country. And we know that they use children as
He
drug
even gave a
mules,
little
and
like,
it
yeah,
is a
you're right.
disgrace, and it
Give a
has
little
to stop.
nod.
Look, I think what Tim said
Yep.
just doesn't pass the smell test. For 3 years, Kamala Harris went out bragging that she was going to undo Donald Trump's border policy. She did exactly that. We had a record number of illegal crossings. We had a record number of fentanyl coming into our country. And now that she's running for president, or a few months before, she says that somehow she got religion and cared a lot about a piece of legislation. The only thing that she did when she became the vice president, when she became the appointed border czar, was to undo 94 Donald Trump executive actions that opened the border. This problem is leading to massive problems in the United States of America. Parents who can't afford health care, schools that are overwhelmed. It's got to stop, and it will when Donald Trump is president again.
Senator, your time is up. Governor, what about our CBS News polling, which does show that a majority...
Why does she keep on saying their time is up when they're automatically stopping on their own?
Right.
Does she like hearing her own voice?
She wants to
I
feel
mean,
like she's
they're
really
all-
moderating it.
This is what happens.
Right? Because I mean, they're both being very good about their time and ending on their own, and yet she's got to butt in and say her time is up. I mean,
I don't know. This has probably been the most professional debate in years. The most professional
Right,
political debate so far.
The Republican governor.
I was thinking that exact same thing because they're both talking very well. They're very composed, and they're not name calling or anything. And
Let Donald Trump continue to make it an issue.
I feel like though
And the
usually with
consequences
VP
of
debates,
Springfield
they're
were
usually a
the
lot
governor had to
more
send
real
state
or
law
more
enforcement to escort kindergartners to school. I believe Senator Vance
the
wants
word?
to solve this,
Like
but by
running-
standing with
what they're
Donald
running
Trump
on.
and not working together to find a solution, it becomes a talking point. And when it becomes
Policies.
a talking point like this, we dehumanize and villainize other human beings.
So I put the bill in our chat.
Governor, your time is up. Senator, I'll give you 1 minute, but let me just ask you the
yep,
question
in the
first.
comments.
The governor has made the point, and I think as a sitting lawmaker, you know that Congress controls the purse strings and any funding. So you have said repeatedly that Donald Trump would, through executive action, solve this. Do you disagree that Congress controls the purse strings and would need to support many of the changes that you would actually want to implement? You have 1 minute.
Not with
First of all,
executive
the
orders.
vast majority of what we need to do at the southern border is just empowering law enforcement to do their job. I've been to the southern border more than
Yep.
our borders are. Kamala Harris has been.
Borders are.
Heartbreaking because the Border Patrol agents, they just want to be empowered to do their job. Of course, additional resources would help, but most of this is about the president and the vice president empowering our law enforcement to say, if you try to come across the border illegally, you've got to stay in Mexico, you've got to go back through proper channels. Now, Governor Walz brought up the community of Springfield, and he's very worried about the things that I've said in Springfield. Look, in Springfield, Ohio, and in communities all across this country, you've got schools that are overwhelmed. You've got hospitals that are overwhelmed.
Oh, I thought he was going to talk about dinner.
Housing that is totally unaffordable because we've got millions of illegal immigrants to compete with Americans for scarce homes. The people that I'm most worried about in Springfield, Ohio, are the American citizens who have had their lives destroyed by Kamala Harris's open border. It is a disgrace, Tim, and I actually think, I agree with you. I think you want to solve this problem, but I don't think that Kamala Harris does.
Senator, your time is up. Governor, you have 1 minute to respond.
Yeah, well, it is law enforcement that asked for the bill. They helped craft it. They're the ones that supported it. That's because they know we need to do this. Look, this issue of continuing to bring this up.
Well, yeah, they supported the parts about the border control, but not the other junk.
Right.
On housing, we could talk a little bit about Wall Street speculators buying up housing and making them less affordable, but it becomes a blame. Look, this bill also gives the money necessary to adjudicate. I agree. It should not take 7 years for an asylum claim to be done. This bill gets it done in 90 days. Then you start to make a difference in this, and you start to adhere to what we know, American principles. Look, I don't talk about my faith a lot, but Matthew 25:40 talks about, to the least amongst us you do unto me. I think that's true of most Americans. They simply want order to it. This bill does it. It's funded, it's supported by the people who do it, and it lets us keep our dignity about how we treat other people.
Thank you, Governor. And just to clarify for our viewers, Springfield, Ohio does have a large number of Haitian migrants who have legal status, temporary protected status. Nora?
Thank you.
Senator, we have so much to get to.
Margaret, I think it's important
We're
because
going to turn now to the
debate-
economy. Thank
Margaret,
you.
the rules were that
The
you guys
economy,
weren't going
we're-
to fact check. And since you're fact checking,
Go, Jerry.
I think
Go,
it's important
JD.
to say what's actually going on.
Yeah.
So there's an application called the CBP One app, where you can go on as an illegal migrant, apply for asylum or apply for parole, and be granted legal status at the wave of a Kamala Harris open border wand. That is not a person coming in, applying for a green card and waiting for 10 years. That
Thank
is
you,
the
Senator.
facilitation of illegal immigration, Margaret, by
Thank
our
you,
own
Senator, for
leadership.
describing the legal process. We have
Kamala
so much
Harris
to get
opened up
to,
that
Senator.
pathway.
Those
We have
laws
so
have been on
much.
the books since 1990.
I love open mics, baby.
We want to have
Has not been on the
Now,
books.
thank God they're not doing what they did at the presidential debate where they were just
Gentlemen,
muting you
That
if
just
they didn't
muting
want to
them.
hear you.
because your mics are cut. We have so much we want to get to.
Wow, they turned their mics off.
Legal process. Nora?
Thank you, Margaret. The economy
Wow.
is a top concern.
Never
for
mind.
voters.
They
Each
will
of
be
your
muting
campaigns
people.
Right?
has released an economic
That
plan.
changed
so let's talk
quickly.
About the specifics. Governor Walz, Vice President Harris unveiled a plan that includes billions in tax credits for manufacturing, housing, and a renewed child tax credit. The Wharton School says your proposals will increase the nation's deficit by $1.2 trillion.
Hell yeah.
How would you pay for that without
A bigger
ballooning the
deficit.
deficit? Governor, I'll give you 2 minutes.
Yeah, thank you. And Kamala Harris and I do believe in the middle class because that's where we come from. We both grew up in that. We understand. So those of you out there listening tonight, you're hearing a lot of.
He didn't grow up in the middle class.
Healthy. That's what this is supposed to happen. You should be.
Did you see the mansion that Kamala Harris grew up in?
Yeah, I know, right?
Kamala grew up in a mansion?
Yeah.
Housing issue.
Yeah.
The thing is, there's 3 million
I thought she
new
worked
houses
at
proposed under
McDonald's
this
in a
plan
middle-class
with down payment
family.
assistance.
Yeah, no, McDonald's even said she didn't work for him.
Really?
And just an
Yep.
asset to be traded somewhere. It's foundational.
Like
to
her
where you're
biggest
at.
thing
And
she,
then making sure that
runs
the things
on,
you
it
buy
feels
every day,
like.
whether they be prescription drugs or other things, that there's fairness in that. Look, the $35 insulin is a good thing, but it costs.
That's been around since Trump.
They were charging
Jesus.
$800 before this law went into effect. As far as the housing goes, I've seen it in Minnesota. 12% more houses in Minneapolis. Prices went down on rent 4%. It's working. And then
It went down because everything's burned down, bro.
$6,000 child tax credit.
That's right.
We have one in Minnesota. Reduces.
I know, I feel like so many
child
people have
poverty by a third.
forgotten
We save
that
money in the long
he
run,
is the
and we do
governor
right
that
thing
was
for families.
there
And
for
then getting
all
businesses
of
off
the
the ground. The law as it
2020,
stands right now is
2019 George
$5,000
Floyd
tax
stuff.
credit for small business, increasing that to $50,000. Now, this is a philosophical difference between us. Donald Trump made a promise, and I'll give you this. He kept it. He took folks from Mar-a-Lago, said, you're rich as hell, I'm going to give you a tax cut. He gave the tax cuts that predominantly went to the top class. What happened there was an
That's not true.
$8 increase in the
I didn't
national
think it
debt,
was
the
true.
largest ever. Now he's proposing a 20% consumption or sales tax on everything we bring in. Everyone agrees, including businesses, it would be destabilizing it, it would increase inflation and potentially lead to a recession. Look, this is simple for you. Where are we going? Kamala Harris.
Lead to? I thought we already are in one.
To do,
Right.
Just ask the wealthiest to pay their fair share. When you do that, our system works best, more people are participating in it, and folks have the things that they need.
Senator, I want to give you a moment to respond on that. But similarly, the Wharton School has done an analysis of the Trump plan and says it would increase the nation's deficit by $5.8 trillion. My question is the same for you. How do you pay for all that?
It's even
without
worse.
ballooning the deficit? I'll give you 2 minutes.
Well, first of all, you're going to hear a lot from Tim Walz this evening, and you just heard it in the answer. A lot of what Kamala Harris proposes to do, and some of it, I'll be honest with you, it even sounds pretty good. Here's what you won't hear, is that Kamala Harris has already done it. Because she's been the vice president for 3.5 years. She had the opportunity to enact all of these great policies, and what she's actually done instead is drive the cost of food higher by 25%, drive the cost of housing higher by about 60%, open the American southern border and make middle-class life unaffordable for a large number of Americans. If Kamala Harris has such great plans for how to address middle-class problems, then she ought to do them now. Not when asking for a promotion, but in the job the American people gave her 3.5 years ago. And the fact that she isn't tells you a lot about how much you can trust her actual plans. Now, Donald Trump's economic plan is not just a plan, but it's also a record. A lot of those same economists attack Donald Trump's plans, and they have PhDs, but they don't have common sense and they don't have wisdom. Because Donald Trump's economic policies delivered the highest take-home pay in a generation in this country, 1.5% inflation, and to boot, peace and security all over the world. So when people say that Donald Trump's economic plan doesn't make sense, I say look at the record. He delivered rising take-home pay for American workers. Now, Tim admirably admits that they want to undo the Trump tax cuts. But if you look at what was so different about Donald Trump's tax cuts, even from previous Republican tax cut plans, is that a lot of those resources went to giving more take-home pay to middle-class and working-class Americans. It was passed in 2017, and you saw an American economic boom unlike we've seen in a generation in this country. That is a record that I'm proud to run on, and we're going to get back to that common sense wisdom so that you can afford to live the American dream again. I know a lot of you are struggling. I know a lot of you are worried about paying the bills. It's going to stop when Donald Trump brings back common sense to this country.
Governor, do you want to respond to that? What has Kamala Harris done for the middle class?
Yeah, well, Kamala Harris's day one was Donald Trump's failure on COVID that led to the collapse of our economy. We were already before COVID in a manufacturing
What?
recession, but 10 million people out of work, largest percentage since the Great Depression. 9 million jobs closed on that. That was
Because you sent 'em home.
There was the Infrastructure Act or other things we moved. Now, you made a question about experts, said this. I've made a note of this. Economists can't be trusted. Science can't be trusted. National security folks can't be trusted. Look, if you're going to be president, you don't have all the answers. Donald Trump believes he does. My pro tip of the day is this. If you need heart surgery, listen to the people at the Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota, not Donald Trump. And the same thing goes with this. And I ask you out there.
But how many people died from the COVID shot listening to professional shot?
Right.
That
I
you're
mean-
paying your taxes every year, and Donald Trump hasn't paid any federal tax in the
He
last
says
15 years.
Trump
In the last
didn't
year as
listen to
president.
medical
That's what's wrong with the
professionals,
system.
but
There's a way
while he
around
was
it,
in
and
office, I feel
brag
like for the
about that.
majority of his
We'll just have
times, he
people
was listening to
fairness in it,
Dr.
and
Fauci
that's
and
all
just
you
doing
want.
what
You have a minute.
they
Governor,
told
you
him
say
to do.
trust the experts.
At least in the
But
beginning.
those same experts
So,
for 40 years
he
said that
clearly
if we shipped
has
our
some
manufacturing
trust
base
for
off to China,
doctors.
we get cheaper goods. They lied about that. They said if we shipped our industrial base off to other countries, to Mexico and elsewhere, it would make the middle class stronger. They were wrong about that. They were wrong about the idea that if we made America less self-reliant, less productive in our own nation, that it would somehow make us better off, and they were wrong about it. And for the first time in a generation, Donald Trump had the wisdom and the courage to say to that bipartisan consensus, we're not doing it anymore. We're bringing American manufacturing back. We're unleashing American energy. We're going to make more of our own stuff. And this isn't just an economic issue. I mean, I've got 3 beautiful little kids at home, 7, 4, and 2, and I love them very much, and I hope they're in bed right now. But look, so many of the drugs, the pharmaceuticals that we put in the bodies of our children are manufactured by nations that hate us. This has to stop, and we're not going to stop it by listening to experts. We're going to stop it by listening to common sense wisdom, which is what Donald Trump governed on.
Senator, your time is up. Governor Walz, can you address that? I mean, voters say they trust Donald Trump on the economy more. Why?
If you're listening tonight and you want billionaires to get tax cuts, you heard what the numbers were. Look,
That's not
I'm a
happening.
guy on this. I'm
God.
not a guy who wanted to ship things overseas, but I understand that, look, we produce soybeans and corn. We need to have fair trading partners. That's something that we believe in. I think the thing that most concerns
That's what
me
Trump
on this
did.
is Donald Trump was the guy who created the largest trade deficit in American history with China. So the rhetoric is good. Much of what the senator said right there, I'm in agreement with him on this. I watched it happen too. I watched it to my communities, and we talked about that. But we had people undercutting the right to collectively bargain. We had right to work states made it more difficult. We had companies that were willing to ship it over, and we saw people profit. Folks that are venture capital in some cases, putting money into companies that were overseas. We're in agreement that we bring those home. The issue is Donald Trump is talking about it. Kamala Harris has a record, 250,000 more manufacturing jobs just out of the IRA.
May I respond to that?
Yes.
So appreciate that. So if you notice, what Governor Walz just did is he said, first of all, Donald Trump has to listen to the experts. And then when he acknowledged that the experts screwed up, he said, well, Donald Trump didn't do nearly as good of a job as the statistics
that's a
show
gross
that he
generalization.
did. So what Tim Walz is doing, and I honestly, Tim, I think you got a tough job here, because you've got to play whack-a-mole. You've got to pretend that Donald Trump didn't deliver rising take-home pay, which of course he did. You've got to pretend that Donald Trump didn't deliver lower inflation, which of course he did. And then you've simultaneously got to defend Kamala Harris's atrocious economic record, which has made gas, groceries, and housing unaffordable for American citizens. I was raised by a woman who would sometimes go into medical debt so that she could put food on the table in our household. I know what it's like to not be able to afford the things that you need to afford. We can do so much better. To all of you watching, we can get back to an America that's affordable again. We just got to get back to common sense economic principles.
I hope we have a conversation on health care then.
Senator, Governor.
Please.
Thank you. Margaret?
We have a lot to get to ahead.
He knew he was right.
Topics, but right now I want to
Yep.
talk about
He's trying to
personal
change topic on his
Yep.
own.
The vice president is often the last voice the president hears before making consequential decisions. We want to ask you
Not
about your
really.
leadership qualities. Governor Walz,
Never.
you said you were in Hong Kong during the deadly Tiananmen Square protests in the spring of 1989. But Minnesota Public Radio and other media outlets are reporting that you actually didn't travel to Asia until August of that year. Can you explain that discrepancy?
Uh-oh.
You have 2
Yeah,
minutes.
well, and to the folks out there who didn't get at the top of this, look, I grew up in small rural
Oh, here we go.
town of 400, town that you
What does
Good,
this have to
no
do
other
with
question.
China?
streetlights come on, and I'm proud of that service. I joined the National Guard at 17.
I didn't know
worked on
Nebraska
family
was in
farm,
China now.
And then I used the GI Bill to become a teacher, passionate about it, a young teacher.
He did not answer the
My
question.
First year out, I got the opportunity in the summer of '89 to travel to China. 35 years ago, be able to do that. I came back home and then started a program to take young people there. We would take basketball teams, we would take baseball teams, we would take dancers, and we would go back and forth to China. The issue for that was to try and learn. Now look, my community knows who I am. They saw where I was at. Look, I will be the first to tell you, I have poured my heart into my community. I've tried to do the best.
It's not answering the question.
Been perfect, and I'm a knucklehead at times, but it's always been about that. Those same people elected me to Congress for 12 years. And in Congress, I was one of the most bipartisan people, working on things like farm bills that we got done, working on veterans benefits. And then the people of Minnesota were able to elect me to governor twice. So look, my commitment has been from the beginning to make sure that I'm there for the people, to make sure that I get this right. I will say more than anything. Many times I will talk a lot. I will get caught up in the rhetoric. But being there, the impact it made, the difference it made in my life, I learned a lot about China.
He would have been better off staying, giving us some speech right now.
Donald Trump should
Yep.
have come on one of those trips with us. I guarantee you he wouldn't.
I've got a light blinking. I'll be right back.
About COVID. And I guarantee you he wouldn't start a trade war that he ends up losing. So this is about trying to understand the world. It's about
He didn't lose any
to
trade
do the
wars.
best you can for your community. And
He went
that's
against
putting
China and
yourself
won.
out there and letting your folks understand what it is. My commitment, whether it be through teaching, which I was good at, or whether it was being a good soldier or was being a good member of Congress, those are the things that I think are the values that people care about.
Those who can't do it,
Governor,
teach.
just to follow up on that, the question was, can you explain the
No, just
discrepancy?
all I said on this was I got there that summer and misspoke on this. So I will just, that's what I've said. So I
I'm
was
surprised they went right back to it and it was like,
wrong
that
and
wasn't
Right.
the question.
Yeah.
The democracy protest went in. And from that, I learned a lot of what needed to be in
That's not what they asked.
Thank you, Governor. Senator Vance, in 2016, you called your running mate Donald Trump unfit for the nation's highest office, and you said he could be America's Hitler. I know you've been asked many times, and you've said you regret those comments and explained you then voted for Donald Trump in 2020. But the Washington Post reported new messages last week in which you also disparaged Trump's economic record while he was president, writing to someone in 2020, quote, Trump thoroughly failed to deliver his economic populism. You're now his running mate, and you've shifted many of your policy stances to align with his. If you become vice president, why should Americans trust that you will give Donald Trump the advice he needs to hear and not just the advice he wants to hear? You have 2 minutes.
Well, first of all, Margaret, because I've always been open. And sometimes, of course, I've disagreed with the president, but I've also been extremely open about the fact that I was wrong about Donald Trump. I was wrong, first of all, because I believed some of the media stories that turned out to be dishonest fabrications of his record. But most importantly, Donald Trump delivered for the American people. Rising wages, rising take-home pay, an economy that worked for normal Americans, a secure southern border, a lot of things, frankly, that I didn't think he'd be able to deliver on. And yeah, when you screw up, when you misspeak, when you get something wrong and you change your mind, you ought to be honest with the American people about it. It's one of the reasons, Margaret, why I've done so many interviews is because I think it's important to actually explain to the American people where I come down on the issues and what changed. Now, you pointed out the messages from 2020. Margaret, I've been extremely consistent that I think there were a lot of things that we could have done better in the Trump administration the first
Asked and
round
answered.
if Congress
Yep.
was doing its job. I strongly believe, and I've been a United States Senator, that Congress is not just a high-class debating society. It's not just a forum for senators and congressmen to whine about problems. It's a forum to govern. So there were a lot of things on the border, on tariffs, for example, where I think that we could have done so much more if the Republican Congress and the Democrats in Congress had been a little bit better about how they govern the country. They were so obsessed with impeaching Donald Trump, they couldn't actually govern. And I want to talk about this tariff issue in particular, Margaret, because Tim just accused this of being a national sales tax. Look, the one thing And you're probably surprised to hear me praising Joe Biden, but the one thing that Joe Biden did is he continued some of the Trump tariffs that protected American manufacturing jobs. And it's the one issue, the most pro-worker part of the Biden administration, it's the one issue where Kamala Harris has run away from Joe Biden's record. Think about this. If you're trying to employ slave laborers in China at $3 a day, you're going to do that and undercut the wages of American workers unless our country stands up for itself and says, you're not accessing our markets unless you're paying middle-class Americans a fair wage.
Right.
Senator, your time is up. Nora?
Thank
No
you.
kidding.
Now to the issue of reproductive rights. Governor Walz, after Roe versus Wade was overturned, you signed a bill into law that made Minnesota one of the least restrictive states in the nation when it comes
Your reproductive rights are never being taken away. It's just aborting the baby at birth is what they're trying to stop.
The 9th month is absolutely fine. Yes or no? Is that what you support? I'll give you 2 minutes.
That's not what the bill says, but look, this issue is what's on everyone's mind. Donald Trump put this all into motion. He brags about how great it was that he put the judges in and overturned Roe versus Wade. 52 years of personal autonomy.
Just give it back to the
And
states.
he tells us,
Yeah.
send it to the states.
It's a states
beautiful
rule.
thing. Amanda Zaworski would disagree with you on it's a beautiful thing. A young bride in Texas waiting for their child at 18 weeks. She has a complication, a tear in the membrane. She needs to go in. The medical care at that point needs to be decided by the doctor. And that would have been an abortion. But in Texas, that would have put them in legal jeopardy. She went home, got sepsis, nearly dies, and now she may have difficulty having children. Or in Kentucky, Hadley Duvall, a 12-year-old child raped and impregnated by her stepfather. Those are horrific. Now, when God asked about that, Senator Vance said 2 wrongs don't make a right. There is no right in this. So in Minnesota, what we did was restore Roe versus Wade. We made sure that we put women in charge of their health care. But look, this is not what, if you don't know Amanda or a Hadley, you soon will. Their Project 2025 is going to have a
Here we go.
pregnancies. It's going to be
I wonder how long it was going to take them to hit that.
to get contraception and limit
I think every
access, if not
Kamala ad
eliminate
is just
Right.
look up
infertility
Project
treatments. For so many of you out there
2025.
listening, me included,
Right.
infertility treatments are why I have a child. That's nobody else's business, but those things are being proposed. And the catch-all on this is well, the states will decide what's right for Texas might not be right for Washington. That's not how this
And that's
works.
truth.
This is basic human right. We have seen
That's why it goes back to the state. Let the state decide.
Texas outpacing many other countries in the world. This is about health care. In Minnesota, we are ranked first in health care for a reason. We trust women. We trust doctors.
Senator, do you want to respond to the governor's claim? Will you create a federal pregnancy monitoring agency?
No, Nora,
No.
certainly we won't. And I want to talk about this issue because I know a lot of Americans care about it, and I know a lot of Americans don't agree with everything that I've ever said on this topic. And, you know, I grew up in a working-class family in a neighborhood where I knew a lot of young women who had unplanned pregnancies and decided to terminate those pregnancies because they feel like they didn't have any other options. And, you know, one of them is actually very dear to me. And I know she's watching tonight, and I love you. And she told me something a couple years ago that she felt like if she hadn't had that abortion, that it would have destroyed her life because she was in an abusive relationship. And I think that what I take from that as a Republican who proudly wants to protect innocent life in this country,
Hit continue.
proudly wants to protect the
Hit
vulnerable.
that continue
is that
button.
My party, we've got to do so much better.
Turn the CC off.
At earning the American people's trust back on this issue where they frankly just don't trust us. And I think that's one of the things that Donald Trump and I are endeavoring to do.
what the heck?
I want us as a Republican
There we
Party
go.
to be pro-family in the fullest sense of the word. I want us to support fertility treatments. I want us to make it easier for moms to afford to have babies. I want it to make it easier for young families
all right, let alone.
to afford a home so they can afford a place to raise that family. And I think there's so much that we can
It's
do
all good.
on the public policy
turn it
front
back on.
just to give women more options. Now, of course, Donald Trump has been very clear that on the abortion policy specifically, that we have a big country and it's diverse. And California has a different viewpoint on this than Georgia. Georgia has a different viewpoint from Arizona. And the proper way to handle this, as messy as democracy sometimes is to let voters make these decisions. Let the individual states make their abortion policy. And I think that's what makes the most sense in a very big, a very diverse, and let's be honest, sometimes a very, very messy and divided country.
Governor, would you like to respond and also answer the question about restrictions?
Yeah, well, the question got asked, and Donald Trump made the accusation that wasn't true about Minnesota. Well, let me tell you about this idea that there's diverse states. There's a young woman named Amber Thurman. She happened to be in Georgia, a restrictive state. Because of that, she had to travel a long distance to North Carolina to try and get her care. Amber Thurman died in that journey back and forth. The fact of the matter is, how can we as a nation say that your life and your rights, as basic as the right to control your own body, is determined on geography? There's a very real chance, had Amber Thurman lived in Minnesota, she would be alive today. That's why the restoration...
That's not a guarantee.
When you listen to Vice President Harris talk about this subject and you hear me talk about it, you hear us talking exactly the same. Donald Trump is...
Yeah, but 2 years ago, they were forcing me to take a shot.
I agree with a lot
Right.
of Senator Vance said about what's
It's my body, my choice. I should, choose to take the shot or not take the shot, not fire some of our military personnel that refuse to take the shot and make us weaker.
You have supported a federal ban on abortion after 15 weeks. In fact, you said if someone can't support legislation like that, quote, you are making the United States the most barbaric pro-abortion regime anywhere in the entire world. My question is, why have you changed your position?
Well, Nora, first of all, I never supported a national ban. I did, when I was running for Senate in 2022, talk about setting some minimum national standard. For example, we have a partial birth abortion ban in place in this country at the federal level. I don't think anybody's trying to get rid of that, or at least I hope not, though I know that Democrats have taken a very radical pro-abortion stance. But Nora, one of the things that changed is in the state of Ohio, we had a referendum in 2023, and the people of Ohio voted overwhelmingly, by the way, against my position. And I think that what I learned from that, Nora, is that we've got to do a better job at winning back people's trust. So many young women would love to have families. So many young women also see an unplanned pregnancy as something that's going to destroy their livelihood, destroy their education, destroy their relationships. And we have got to earn people's trust back. And that's why Donald Trump and I are committed to pursuing pro-family policies, making child care more accessible, making fertility treatments more accessible, because we've got to do a better job at that. And that's what real leadership is.
Governor, your response.
I'm going to respond on the pro-abortion piece of that. No, we're not. We're pro-women. We're pro-freedom to make your own choice. We know what the implications are to not be that. Women having miscarriages, women not getting the care, physicians feeling like they may be prosecuted for providing that care. And as far as making sure that we're educating our children and giving them options, Minnesota's a state with one of the lowest teen pregnancy rates. We understand that too. We know that the options need to be available, and we make that true. We also make it, we're a top 3 state for the best place to raise children. But these two things, to try and say that we're pro-children, but we don't like this, or you guys are pro-abortion, that's not the case at all. We are pro-freedoms for women to make their choices, and we're going, and Kamala Harris is making the case, to make options for children more affordable.
There's
a
no
$6,000
way.
child tax credit,
There's only
but we're
2
not gonna
states
base
that
on
are
the backs
better
of
than
making
Minnesota
someone like
to
Amber
raise a
Thurman
kid.
drive 600 miles to try and get health care.
Senator.
May I respond to that? First of
Or
all,
maybe it
Governor, I agree with you. Amber Thurman should still be alive, and there are a lot of people who should still be alive, and I certainly wish that she was. And maybe you're free to disagree with me on this and explain this to me, but as I read the Minnesota law that you signed into law, the statute that you signed into law, it says that a doctor who presides over an abortion where the baby survives, the doctor is under
He's shaking his head no.
life-saving care. to
He's
a
telling
baby
me what he
who
wrote.
a botched late-term abortion. That is, I think,
That's
whether
not
you're
true.
pro-choice or
That's not how the law
pro-abortion,
is.
that is fundamentally barbaric. And that's why I use that word, Nora, is because some of what we've seen, do you want to force Catholic hospitals to perform abortions against their will?
I don't know where
Because
he got
Kamala
his
Harris has
statistic.
supported
I still
some
think this
Catholic
is
nuns,
crazy, but according
violate
to
their freedom of conscience.
Forbes,
we can be a big and diverse country where we
Minnesota's
respect people's
not
freedom of
on
conscience and make
top
the country
25.
more pro-baby and pro-family. But please,
They're not.
At least
Yes,
no
Governor,
city in
please.
Minnesota
Yeah.
or
Look,
town
this
in
is one where there's
Minnesota is in
always
the
something
top
that this is a
25
very
best
simple
places to raise a
proposition.
kid.
Right.
These are women's decisions to make about their health care decisions, and the physician.
So we'll do a wrap up after this. I have a whole different outlook on the abortion side of it. So when we're done, we'll do a wrap up. I'm making some
Not
notes.
the way the law is written. Look, I've given this advice on a lot of things, that getting involved, getting engaged, that's been misread, and it was fact-checked at the last debate. But the point on this is there's a continuation of these guys to try and tell women or to get involved. I use this line on this, just mind your own business on this. Things worked best when Roe versus Wade was in place. When we do a restoration of Roe, that works best. That doesn't preclude us from increasing funding for children. It doesn't increase us from making sure that once that child's born, like in Minnesota, they get meals. They get early childhood education. They get health care. So the hiding behind we're going to do all these other things when you're not proposing them in your budget. Kamala Harris is proposing them. She's proposing all those things to make life easier for families.
I asked a specific question, Governor. You gave me a slogan as a response.
It's not the case. It's not true. That's not what the law says. So they fact-checked it with President Trump.
Gentlemen, there's a lot to discuss. We have to move on, and we're going to be right back with much more of the CBS
All right.
News vice presidential debate.
Let's mute this and come back to a 3-shot now. So let's talk about some of this.
All right.
Oh my God, this is crazy. So, first things, I mean, and you guys need to get in there because I'll talk if you let me talk. Is
Yeah, of course.
the abortion thing, right? So this is what I feel about the abortion, being an independent. I think it should go back to the state, and I think it should all be on the decision of the mother. And I'll follow that. It's her body, it's her right? It's her body. So if they're going to do it, so here's the bottom line: if they're going to do it, they're going to do it. They'll find a way. That will
Right.
happen. So
Absolutely.
I would rather them go medically and get it done correct, and then it's their conscience that's got to
That's
make
right.
it. That's going to lead them. It's not mine. It's not you guys. It's not their parents. It's not anybody else. Their brain has to be able to process that they did this for the rest of their life.
Right. And that's their own moral decision. I mean, we might not
Exactly.
agree with that moral decision,
Right.
but that's their choice. It's
Exactly.
their choice, their body.
Exactly.
And I definitely agree. Bring it back to the states. And even if there was some kind of federal ban, the states don't listen to the federal government on everything. I mean, look at marijuana.
Yeah.
Marijuana is federally illegal. You are not allowed to smoke it anywhere by law under federal government. But how many states make it legal? So, I mean,
Right.
let's bring it back to the states where it belongs, just like marijuana is a state law, which oversteps the federal law. And I mean, I haven't heard of any state that's really going to ban abortion, period. There might be tougher rules as far as, hey, you have to do it sooner than later, things like that, or
Right.
have to be a rape or incest or something that is medically necessary.
Right. If the mother's in
and s-
danger, okay, I got no,
Absolutely.
do it. That's not a problem. But the problem,
And there's not a doctor that's going to say stop
No.
you. And
No.
every doctor is going to perform that procedure if it's medically necessary to
Exactly.
save the mother, regardless of what the law says.
That's correct.
And they're protected. They have laws that protect them in saving human
Yeah.
life
So
over
it-
I feel like
overstepping
it
the law.
shouldn't even really be a talking point at this point. Like,
I'll
I feel
come get your
every
light, don't worry.
president- Yeah, my light just went out. Every president or presidential candidate wants some sort of like abortion allowed. I feel like not many people are against it at this point. It's just I feel like Kamala just really doesn't have much else to run on. So she's trying to use an issue that was maybe a real thing 20 years ago. But at this point, I feel
Correct.
like the national populace has basically figured out where they stand. So I don't really see how this is still even a topic this far in America.
I agree. A lot of people might be morally against it, but they're not against allowing other people to make their own choices and their own morally right choice and do what's necessary for themselves and their family and everybody involved. Yeah, it's very few issues, and majority of the people are okay with putting the rules back to the states. We'd be
And they
much
should
better
be.
off as a country if we had more state rules versus federal
And yeah,
rules.
I think this should be, if anything, just the beginning of more things going back to more just state laws matter more than a federal law.
Yep.
Which, I mean,
I
that
agree.
was the big fight when the country was being formed, was whether we're going to be leaning more federal or more towards individuality within the states. And back then, even then, there was always more pro state, keep the small government together.
To change topics a little bit, J.D. Vance made a comment about law enforcement, allowing law enforcement to do their job and enforce the rules that are there to help with border control. That same statement would also help with gun control. They haven't talked about gun control right now, but if they allow the police and the prosecutors to enforce the current laws on the books, gun control would be a lot more involved, and a lot more criminals would be without guns.
Yep.
And but they're not letting them. I mean, in Chicago is one of the biggest things. I know, being in the
There's
boat
actually talking
business,
about
I get a
gun
lot of.
violence and gun stuff right now. They just came back to the
All right, let's
debate.
get back onto them.
Go back.
Sentenced to 10 years in prison. Do you think holding parents responsible could curb mass shootings? I'll give you 2 minutes.
Yeah, well, Nora, on that particular case, I don't know the full details, but I certainly trust local law enforcement and local authorities to make those decisions. I think in some cases the answer is going to be yes, and in some cases the answer is going to be no. And the details really matter here, of course. For example, if a kid steals a gun, that's going to be different than if a parent hands over a gun knowing that their kid is potentially dangerous. But look, I want to just sort of speak as a father of 3 beautiful little kids, and our oldest is now in 2nd grade. And like a lot of parents, we send our kids to school with such hope and such joy and such pride at their little faces on the first day of school. And we know, unfortunately, that a lot of kids are going to experience this terrible epidemic of gun violence. And of course, our hearts go out to the families that are affected by this terrible stuff. And we do have to do better. And I think that Governor Walz and I actually probably agree that we need to do better on this. The question is just, how do we actually do it? Now, here's something that really bothers me and worries me about this epidemic of violence. The gross majority, close to 90% in some of the statistics I've seen, of the gun violence in this country is committed with illegally obtained firearms. And while we're on that topic, we know that thanks to Kamala Harris's open border, we've seen a massive influx in the number of illegal guns run by the Mexican drug cartels. So that number, the amount of illegal guns in our country is higher today than it was 3.5 years ago. But what do we do about the schools? What do we do to protect our kids? And I think the answer is, and I say this not loving the answer, because I don't want my kids to go to school in a school that feels unsafe or where there are visible signs of security. But I unfortunately think that we have to increase security in our schools. We have to make the doors lock better. We have to make the doors stronger. We've got to make the windows stronger. And of course, we've got to increase school resource officers, because the idea that we can magically wave a wand. And
I have a big thing to say about this after this.
It just doesn't fit with recent experience. So we've got to make our schools safer.
Yes.
And I think we've got to have some common sense bipartisan solutions for how to do that.
Governor, you have 2 minutes.
Well, I think all the parents watching tonight, this is your biggest nightmare. Look, I got a 17-year-old, and he witnessed a shooting at a community center playing volleyball. Those things don't leave you. As a member of Congress, I sat in my office surrounded by dozens of the Sandy Hook parents, and they were looking at my 7-year-old picture on the wall. Their 7-year-old were dead, and they were asking us to do something. And look, I'm a hunter. I own firearms. The vice president is. We understand that the Second Amendment is there, but our first responsibility is to our kids to figure this out. In Minnesota, we've
Did she say the vice president was a hunter?
Yep.
Enhanced.
Yeah, she has shotguns.
I thought he was talking about himself. He's the hunter.
He is, but he also said she was too.
Won't allow research to be even done on gun violence.
We'll let the gun expert talk about that
We
one.
should just live with it, and
I do
here's what I
appreciate how all
think. This
the
is a
gun
good start to the
control
conversation.
debate hasn't really been
100%
a
believe
thing
that
in
Senator
this
Vance
election. I feel like it's been like the
hates it when these
biggest
kids
thing in the
get-
last
it's
like
a
3.
bullet, and it breaks your heart. I agree with that.
I put a poll on LinkedIn after the presidential debate when
Things that work.
VP Harris made a comment that she owns a gun, and the poll was, what gun do you think she owns? Shotgun, pistol, handgun, or water gun? 85%, I think, went to water gun.
Not infringing on your Second Amendment. And the idea
None actually went to shotgun, which is odd that
it just
you say
doesn't
that
make any sense.
they have a
Kamala
shotgun.
Harris, as an attorney general, worked on this issue. She knows that it's there. No one's trying to scaremonger and say we're taking your guns, but I ask all of you out there, do you want your schools hardened to look like a fort? Is that what we have to go?
No,
We know
all the kids starting
there's
need to start being nice to each other.
that their children aren't practicing these types of
Or like
drills.
you said, start
They're being
getting
kids.
punched
We
in the
owe it to
face if
them to
they
get a fix.
they say
These
something
are
fucked
things
up.
that shouldn't be
It's
done.
amazing how that will.
Still keep your firearms, and we can make it.
My coach used to, my principal, fight it out, boys.
Breaks your heart.
Get it over with.
Senator.
Tim, first of all, I didn't know that your 17-year-old witnessed a shooting, and I'm sorry about that, and I hope that he's
appreciate
doing
you saying
okay.
so.
Christ have mercy. It is awful. And I appreciate what Tim said, actually, about
That's gonna be
because I
big
do
time
think it
fact
illustrates
checked
some of the,
overnight.
frankly, weird differences
Oh, whether
between our
his
own
daughter
country's gun violence
actually
problem
witnessed the shooting.
and Finland is
Yep.
okay, first of all, we have way higher rates.
I'm
of
surprised that
mental
hasn't been
health
brought up sooner.
abuse,
That could be like a
mental
major
health,
point for him.
substance abuse.
for Kamala
We
and
have
her
way higher rates of
campaign
depression,
on
way higher
stricter
rates of
guns.
anxiety. We unfortunately have a mental health crisis in this country that I really do think that we need to get to the root causes of, because I don't think it's the whole reason why we have such a bad gun violence problem, but I do think it's a big piece of it. Another driver of the gun violence epidemic, especially that affecting our kids, it doesn't earn as many headlines, but is the terrible gun violence problem in a lot of our big cities. And this is why we have to empower law enforcement to arrest the bad guys.
And they
put 'em
usually
away,
have the
and take
strictest gun laws,
offenders
too.
off the streets. I think there's a whole host of things that we can do here, but I do
In
think
Chicago,
we've got to talk about
A couple
more
of gangbang and shot up each other's vehicle. Nobody died. They did not bring charges against either one because there was no victim.
Yeah, I said it.
Even though
San Diego parents, I've become friends with school shooters. I've seen it. Look, the NRA.
it's
I was
crazy.
an
I
NRA
mean,
guy for a
they
long
had
time.
they had guns unregistered, shot in public.
My
3
mom
different
put me in
crimes
my
there,
car so I could fess
and
on
they
a
didn't
football
prosecute
field.
any of
That's
them.
not where we live today.
That's insane.
And several things I want to mention on this is talking
And
about cities
Chicago's
and where
almost
it's
as
at.
bad as
The
it's
number
worse
one-
shooting wise than
Yeah.
LA.
Most firearm
St. Louis is number one, didn't they?
rural
Oh,
suicides.
that's right. Yeah,
And we
yeah.
have an
They
epidemic
have
of
jumped up to
children
like
getting
1 or
guns and
2 or
shooting
something
themselves.
like that.
And so we have, and we should look at all of the issues.
I mean, I think Memphis is pretty high
Making
up
sure
there too.
folks have health
Yep.
care and all that, but I want to be very careful. This idea of stigmatizing mental health, just because you have a mental health issue doesn't mean you're violent. And I think what we end up doing is we start looking for a scapegoat. Sometimes it just is the guns. It's just the guns. And there are
Well,
things-
guns don't kill people. People kill people. Don't you know that, dude?
And I think this is a healthy conversation. I think there's a capacity.
Maybe they haven't
to
seen
find
what happens in
solutions on this
England. Now
work.
that there's no
But that
guns,
Second
people
Amendment
just get
protect your
stabbed.
children. That's our problem.
Yeah.
Gentlemen, thank you. Margaret?
Thank you, Nora. Let's turn now to
There
the
is a
top contributor
federal
to
law that any
inflation.
gun sold at a gun shop must include a gun lock.
There's a shortage of more than 4 million homes.
that
in the
law's been
United
around for a
States,
while
and that contributes
under a Healthy
to the high
Kids
housing prices.
program.
Governor Walz,
And
the Harris
if the
campaign
gun does not
proposes
come with a lock from the
$25,000
manufacturer,
down
the gun
payment
shop must provide a
assistance
lock
for first-time
with the gun.
home buyers and a $10,000 tax credit. They also promise to build 3 million new homes. Where are you building these homes, and won't handing out that kind of money just drive up prices higher?
No,
Ooh.
it's not handing out. We have, first, let me say this issue of housing, and I think those of you listening on this, the problem we've had is that we've got a lot of folks that see housing as another commodity. It can be bought up, it can be shifted, it can be moved around. Those are not folks living in those houses. Those of you listening tonight, that house is a big deal. I bought and owned one house in my life. My mom still lives in the house where I was. And when I think of a house, I'm thinking of Christmas services after midnight mass where you go with your family. We need to make it more affordable. And one of the things, as I said, this program that the vice president is pushing forward and bringing a new way of approaching this is something we're doing in Minnesota from that lead. We in the state invested in making sure our housing was the biggest investment that we'd ever made in housing. It starts to make it easier. We cut some of the red tape. Local folks, look, we can't do it at the federal level, but local folks make it easier to build those homes. And then that down payment assistance. I can tell all of you out there, one of the, certainly for me, using the GI Bill was one thing, but a veteran's home loan, the big thing about a veteran's home loan is you don't have to pay the down payment. Those are things that make it there. Now, look, you're going to pay it back, and you're going to pay your mortgage. Those are things that we know in the long run, the appreciated value, the generational wealth that's created from it. And
JD Vance is looking at him like, what the hell are you talking about right
this is
now?
a city where we've seen the lowest inflation rates. We've seen a 12% increase in stock because we put some of
He's
these
talking about
things
something that's been around for
implementing
Ever.
20, 30 years.
program to
Yep.
Make sure we give some of that down payment assistance. We get it back.
Well, I wish I had Mama Tech on here. She'd be
People with
like
stable housing,
eating this up.
stable job. People with stable housing have their kids able to get to school. All of those things in the long run end up saving our money. And that's the thing that I think we should be able to find some common ground in, but we can't blame immigrants for the only reason. That's not the case that's happening in many cities. The fact of the matter is that we don't have enough naturally affordable housing.
No, because BlackRock bought it all up.
There to help kickstart it,
Vanguard bought it all up.
create that.
That's why.
Governor, your time is up. Senator Vance, as far as your campaign's position, the promise is to seize federal lands to build homes, remove regulation, provide tax breaks, and cut back on immigration, which you say pushes up prices. Where are you going to build all the new homes you're promising, and what part of any of this plan will provide immediate relief? You have 2 minutes.
Well, first of all, Tim just said something that I agree with. We don't want to blame immigrants for higher housing prices, but we do want to blame Kamala Harris for letting in millions of illegal aliens into this country, which does drive up costs, Tim. 25 million illegal aliens competing with Americans for scarce homes is one of the most significant drivers of home prices in the country. It's why we have massive increases in home prices that have happened right alongside massive increases in illegal alien populations under Kamala Harris's leadership. Now, Tim just mentioned a bunch of ideas. Now, some of those ideas I actually think are halfway decent, and some of them I disagree with, but the most important thing here is Kamala Harris is not running as a newcomer to politics. She is the sitting vice president. If she wants to enact all of these policies to make housing more affordable, I invite her to use the office that the American people already gave her, not sit around and campaign and do nothing while Americans find the American dream of homeownership completely unaffordable. Now, you asked, Margaret, what would immediately
My lights are possessed.
equation for American citizens?
Right?
If you lower
I'll be right back.
as Donald Trump says, drill, baby, drill. One of the biggest drivers of housing costs, aside from illegal immigration, is, think about it. If a truck driver's paying 40% more for diesel, then the lumber he's delivering to the job site to build a house is also going to become a lot more expensive. If we open up American energy, you will get immediate pricing relief for American citizens, not, by the way, just in housing, but in a whole host of other economic goods, too.
Senator Vance, you still have 23 seconds there. Do you want to answer
Can I have it?
where?
Can I have it?
But Senator, where are you going to see
Let me have it.
lands? Can you clarify?
Right? He needs it.
What Donald Trump has said is we have a lot of federal lands that aren't being used for anything. They're not being used for national park. They're not being used, and they could be places where we build a lot of housing. And I do think that we should be opening up building in this country. We have a lot of land that could be used. We have a lot of Americans that need homes. We should be kicking out illegal immigrants who are competing for those homes, and we should be building more homes for the American citizens who deserve to be here.
Senator, your time is up. Governor, I do want to let you
Look at that look. Did you see that look?
The president is letting in
That's awesome.
migrants.
And again,
that
you
it's
have
affecting
facts. I
housing
guess we
prices.
agreed not to fact check. I'll check it. That, look, crossings are down compared to when Donald Trump left office. But it's, again, blaming and not trying to find the solution. I was going to ask, though, on
What?
this question, are we
Did
going
he just say what I thought he said?
to the same
He
federal
did.
rate?
I think he
did.
said if things are down, things are
Things are down from when Trump.
Minnesota doesn't have a lot of federal lands. I know in the western part of the countries we do. There's not a lot of federal lands in and around Minneapolis, for example. So the issue is I don't understand the
Well,
federal
Minneapolis
lands
is a
issue
city.
unless
They're
we
pretty
see
built
this,
up
and I worry
already.
about this as someone who cares deeply
least
about
was
our
built
national
up.
parks and our federal lands. Look, Minnesota, we protect these things. We've got about 20% of the world's fresh water. These lands protect. They're there for a reason. They belong to all of us. But again, this is when you view housing and you view these things as commodities. Like, there's a chance to make money here. Let's take this federal land and let's sell it to people for that. I think there's better ways to do this. We've seen it in Minnesota. We're able to refurbish some of these houses. We're able to make some investments. That gets people in. And I'm still...
Minnesota has approximately 3.8 million acres of federally owned land.
Economists are saying that it is immigrants that's adding to the cost.
Governor,
Where's
your
the study?
time is
Sorry.
It's illegal immigrants.
On that point, I'd like for you to clarify, there are many contributing factors to high housing costs. What evidence do you have that migrants are part of this problem?
Illegal.
The Federal Reserve study that we're happy to share after the debate, we'll put it up on social media actually, that really drills down on the connection between increased levels of migration, especially illegal immigration, and higher housing prices. Now, of course, Margaret, that's not the
Did he just shake
entire
his head
driver of
yes
higher housing
in
prices.
agreement?
It's also the regulatory regime of Kamala Harris. Look, we are a country of builders. We're a country of doers. We're a country of explorers. But we increasingly have a federal administration that makes it harder to develop our resources, makes it harder to build things, and wants to throw people in jail for not doing everything exactly as Kamala Harris says they have to do. And what that means is that you have a lot of people who would love to build homes who aren't able to build homes. I actually agree with Tim Walz. We should get out of this idea of housing as a commodity. But the thing that has most turned housing into a commodity is giving it away to millions upon millions of people who have no legal right to be here.
What are the federal regulations? I deal with this as a governor.
You can very quickly reply.
I'm sorry. I get this as a governor, and I don't necessarily disagree with that in some cases, many of those are local, many of them are state. I don't know which ones are federal, but I think whenever we talk regulations, people think they can get rid of them. I think you want to be able to get out of your house in a fire. I think you want to make sure that it's fireproof and those types of things. So which are the regulations? Because the vice president's not responsible for those. Congress writes those.
Governor, thank you. Gentlemen, we have a lot to get to. You're passionate about the housing crisis, I can tell. But Nora?
Thank you. One of the top problems facing Americans is the high cost of health care. Senator Vance, at the last presidential debate, former President Trump was asked about replacing the Affordable Care Act. In response, he said, "I have concepts of a plan." Since then, Senator, you've talked about changing how chronically ill Americans get health insurance. Can you explain how that would work? And can you guarantee that Americans with pre-existing conditions won't pay more? I'll give you 2 minutes.
Well, of course, we're going to cover Americans with pre-existing conditions. In fact, a lot of my family members have gotten health care. I believe, members of my family actually got private health insurance, at least for the first time, switched off of Medicaid onto private insurance for the first time under Donald Trump's leadership. And I think that, a lot of people have criticized this concepts of a plan remark. I think it's very simple common sense. I think as Tim Walz knows from 12 years in Congress, you're not going to propose a 900-page bill standing on a debate stage. It would bore everybody to tears, and it wouldn't actually mean anything because part of this is the give and take of bipartisan negotiation. Now, when Donald Trump was actually president, and again, he has a record to be proud of, prescription drugs fell in 2018 for the first time in a very long time. Under Kamala Harris's leadership, prescription drugs are up about 7%. Under Donald Trump's entire 4 years, they were up about 1.5%. He introduced pricing transparency. You think about health care. You go into a hospital, you try to buy something, and nobody knows what it actually costs. That price transparency will actually give American consumers a little bit more choice.
Yep.
And will also drive down costs. And we talked about, the reinsurance regulations is what I was talking about. Look, Donald Trump has said that if we allow states to experiment a little bit on how to cover both the chronically ill but the non-chronically ill, it's not just a plan. He actually implemented some of these regulations when he was president of the United States. And I think you can make a really good argument that it salvaged Obamacare, which was doing disastrously until Donald Trump came along. And I think this is an important point about President Trump. Of course, you don't have to agree with everything that President Trump has ever said or ever done, but when Obamacare was crushing under the weight of its own regulatory burden and health care costs, Donald Trump could have destroyed the program. Instead, he worked in a bipartisan way to ensure that Americans had access to affordable care. It's not perfect, of course, and there's so much more that we can do, but I think that Donald Trump has earned the right to put in place some better health care policies. He's earned it because he did it successfully the first time.
Yep.
All right, here's where being an old guy gives you some history. I was there at the creation of the ACA. And the reason it was so important is I come from a major
After all
healthcare
the
state,
stuff about
home of
Biden
the Mayo
being
Clinic,
old, I don't know
home
if
to
you
Medical
wanna
Alley,
go that
3M,
route.
Right?
all of
Call
those. We
yourself the
understand
old
healthcare.
guy.
It's why we're ranked first on affordability and accessibility and quality of healthcare. And so what I know is under Kamala Harris,
When he made the comment about the border being less right now than it was during Trump,
now Donald
Yep.
Trump all of a sudden wants to.
I
Go
think he
back
was
and
referring
remember
to
this.
the
He ran on the
the,
first thing
the
he was gonna
arrest,
do on
border
day one
crossing arrest
was
in
to
July was
repeal
lower than
Obamacare.
Trump's
On day
last
one, he tried to sign an
month in
executive order
office.
to repeal
Right.
the
And
ACA. He
that would be
signed
true
on to
because
a
they're
lawsuit
arresting
to
a lot
repeal
less
the
people and
ACA,
allowing
but lost at
people
the
to come
Supreme Court.
freely in.
And he
So,
would
of
have
course,
repealed the ACA
they're
had
going to
it
be
not been
down,
for the
and
courage of
they've
John
been on
McCain to save that bill.
a 5-month
Fast forward, what that means
spiral
to you is
down with
you lose
arrests.
your
So,
pre-existing conditions. If you're sitting at home and you got
that's
asthma, too bad.
stating
If you
facts
can,
that
probably not.
doesn't really help
Hold
him.
your foot during football might kick you out. Your kids get kicked out when they're 26. Kamala Harris negotiated drug
I wish I
prices
could
for the
find
first
it,
time
but I saw
with
a
Medicare. We have 10 drugs that will come
about a
online,
week
the most
ago,
common
I
ones
saw a
that'll be there.
crazy
But look,
chart
this
about
issue,
basically
and when
like
Donald Trump
the
said, "I've
migrant
got a concept of a
numbers
plan,"
from
it
the
cracked me
last
up
like
as a
5
fourth-grade
different
teacher because my
presidents,
kids
and I
would have
wish I
never
could
given me
find it
that.
or pull it up
But
again.
what
But
Senator
the
Vance just
the
explained
drastic
might be worse than a
increase
concept,
from Trump to
because what he
Biden,
explained
and you
is
can also see that
pre-Obamacare. And
there
I'll make
really
this as
is a
simple as
drop
possible
off
because
from
I
like
have done this
the
for a long
Clinton
time.
era,
What they're
Bush,
saying
Obama.
is,
It's always
if
slowly
you're
Yes.
increasing,
healthy,
and then all
why
of a
should
sudden
you
it
be
gets to
paying
Trump,
more?
it drops
So what
again.
they're gonna
But
do
then
is the
Biden, it
insurance
like
companies,
triples
who
whatever
they insure, because guess
Obama
what happens?
ever
You
touched.
pay your premium, it's not much. They figure they're not going
I
to
wish
have
I
to
could
pay
Well,
find
Obama
that.
at one point
But those of
was
you a little older
talking
who
about
have
securing the border and I
cancer,
thought he had to
they're
secure the
going to
border
get
and
kicked
keep the
out of it.
immigrants out.
That's why the system didn't work.
I mean,
Kamala
he's on
Harris
record
wants to
saying
protect
that
and
somewhere.
enhance the ACA.
Governor, thank you. Senator, you have not yet explained how you would protect people with pre-existing conditions or laid out that plan.
Well, look, we currently have laws and regulations in place right now that protect people with pre-existing conditions. We want to keep those regulations in place, but we also want to make the health insurance marketplace function a little bit better. Now, what Governor Walz just said is actually not true. A lot of what happened and the reason that Obamacare was crushing under its own weight is that a lot of young and healthy people were leaving the exchanges. Donald Trump actually helped address that problem, and he did so in a way that preserved people's access to coverage who had
So-
pre-existing conditions. But again, something that these guys do is they make a lot of claims about if Donald Trump becomes president, all of these terrible consequences are going to ensue. But in reality, Donald Trump was president. Inflation was low. Take-home pay was higher, and he saved
Pre-existing conditions,
from a Democratic administration that was collapsing
yes,
and would have
it
collapsed.
doesn't stop you from getting insurance,
Leadership. He did his
but it
job,
definitely
which is
increases
govern
your rate
in a
when you have a
bipartisan way and get
precondition.
results, not just complain about problems, but actually
And
solve
they
them.
don't talk about that. Yeah, they'll give you insurance. They can't stop. They can't not give you insurance, but they can increase the rate because you have a pre-existing condition.
The question about this, of young people, whatever.
My
that's
partner
not-
had his hip replaced, and his
Republicans
premium's
want
crazy
to nail
right now
it,
because he
saying,
had
well,
the hip
Americans should be
replaced
treated
within the
differently
last
than
couple of
I think
years.
the individual mandate's a good
Oh, they
idea.
can
Yep.
adjust it on you
I think
just
the
like
idea of
I thought it was
making
like
sure
when
the
you get a
risk pool
new
is broad enough
policy,
to
that's
cover
when
it,
they
and that's the
can
only way
like
insurance
screw the
works.
rates
When
around,
it
at least
doesn't
for
get
health wise,
collapses,
but
you
they
are
can just
asking
adjust it like when
pre-ACA,
right
will we get
after
people
you've got
out?
something
Look,
done.
people know
Well, no, when you get a new policy,
people expect
so
it
in the
to be
past they
there.
could
And
deny
they
you
are
coverage
able to
because
make
you had a
it, are making it this way.
pre-existing condition.
People to be in the
Now
market.
they can't deny you, but they can
People
charge
might
you
not be able
a
to
higher
get
rate,
there,
Oh,
but
just
we
like
make
car
sure
insurance going to
that
hire you,
when you get sick and old,
charge you a
instead of
higher rate
waiting
because you had an
people
accident
say,
in the
well,
last 5 years.
I don't
Yeah.
want to buy into Medicare or
It's
whatever.
under
Good,
the
fine,
same kind of
once you
concept.
get past 70. So look,
But yeah,
the
they
system
can't
works. We can
increase the
continue to
existing
protect it.
rate.
Kamala Harris did that. The way she made everything better was negotiating those 10 drugs on Medicare for the first time in American history.
Thank you. Margaret?
Can I
we're-
address that?
I apologize. We're out of time. We have a number of subjects to discuss. Margaret?
Families
Number
in
of
America.
subjects. They only got like 10 minutes
There is a
left.
child care crisis
Sure.
in this country, and the United States is one of the very few developed countries in the world without a national paid leave program for new parents. Governor Walz, you said that if Democrats win both the White House and Congress, this is a day one priority for you. How long should
What?
employers be required to pay workers while they are home taking care of their newborns? You have 2 minutes.
Zero.
Well, that's negotiable, and that's what Congress worked. But here's what the deal is. Americans sitting out there right now, you may work for a big company. Look, we're home in Minnesota to some of the largest Fortune 500 companies. Kamala Harris knows that in California. Those companies provide paid family medical leave. One is, I think they're moral and they think it's a good thing, but it also keeps their employees healthy. We in Minnesota passed a paid family medical leave. You have a child, and I had to go back to work 5 days after my kids were born. This allows you to stay home a certain amount of time. What we know is that gets the child off to a better start. The
She
family
asked
works
how
better.
long is
We
that
stay
time?
in their employers. We get more consistency in that. So Kamala Harris has made it a priority. We implemented it in Minnesota, and we see growth. That's how you become a pro-business state. But the negotiations on it, and here's the issue. Those big companies are able to offer it. Those of you out there who don't have it, just imagine what happens if you get cancer or your child gets sick. We know what happens. You end up staying home. In some places, that means no paycheck because you've got no protection on that. This is the case of an economy that Donald Trump has set for the wealthiest amongst us. He's willing to give those tax breaks to the wealthiest. He's willing to say, bust those unions up, do whatever. What we're saying is the economy works best when it works for all of us. And so a paid family medical leave program, and I will tell you, go to the families or go to the businesses and ask them. As far as childcare on this, you have to take it at both the supply and the demand side. You can't expect the most important people in our lives to take either our children or our parents to get paid the least amount of money. And we have to make it easier for folks to be able to get into that business and then to make sure that folks are able to pay for that. We were able to do it in Minnesota, and I'm still telling you this. We were listed as the best state. We're still in crisis on this. A federal program of paid family and medical leave and help with this will enhance our workforce, enhance our families, and make it easier to have the children that you want.
Governor, your time is up. Senator,
As long as you don't abort them.
A national paid leave program, and if so, for how long should employers be mandated to pay their employees while they are home taking care of their newborn? You have 2 minutes.
Yeah, well, first of all, Margaret, a number of my Republican colleagues and some Democrats, too, have worked on this issue, and I think there is a bipartisan solution here because a lot of us care about this issue. I mean, look, I speak from this very personally because I'm married to a beautiful woman who is an incredible mother to our 3 beautiful kids, but is also a very, very brilliant corporate litigator, and I'm so proud of her. But being a working mom, even for somebody with all of the advantages of my wife, is extraordinarily difficult. And it's not just difficult from a policy perspective. She actually had access to paid family leave because she worked for a bigger company. But the cultural pressure on young families and especially young women, I think makes it really hard for people to choose the family model they want. A lot of young women would like to go back to work immediately. Some would like to spend a little time home with the kids. Some would like to spend longer at home with the kids. We should have a family care model that makes choice possible. And I think this is a very important substantive difference between Donald Trump and Kamala Harris's approach. I mean, look, if you look at the federal programs that we have that support paid family leave right now, the Community Development Block Grant, and there's another block grant program that spends a lot of money from the federal government. These programs only go to one kind of child care model. Let's say you'd like your church maybe to help you out with child care. Maybe you live in a rural area or an urban area and you'd like to get together with families in your neighborhood to provide child care in the way that makes the most sense. You don't get access to any of these federal monies. We want to promote choice in how we deliver family care and how we promote child care because, look, it is unacceptable.
Look at him. He's like, yep, sounds like a good idea. Yep, that's a good idea.
Hey, boy, you're smart.
And one of the biggest complaints I hear from young families is people who feel like they don't have options, like they're choosing between.
I feel like he
going to
shook
work or
his head
taking
in
care of their
agreement a
kids.
few times
That is an
tonight.
incredible burden
Definitely he
on
was.
American families.
I'd vote for you.
Definitely saying, yeah, I agree with this. Good job.
Senator,
We should include this in our plan, too.
you have
It's like if
also
we
said,
win,
Senator
we might just
Vance,
have to steal
many
that.
things about the American family. The Federal Reserve says parents will spend nearly as much on child care as they do on housing each month. So I want to get your thoughts on this. President Trump recently said,
That's not true.
as much as child care is talked about as being expensive, it's relatively speaking not very expensive compared to the kinds of numbers we'll be taking in. Is President Trump committed to the $5,000 per child tax credit that you have described? You have 1 minute.
Well, what President Trump said, Margaret, I just want to defend my running mate here a little bit, is that we're going to be taking in a lot of money by penalizing companies for shipping jobs overseas and penalizing countries who employ slave laborers and then ship their products back into our country and undercut the wages of American workers. It's the heart of the Donald Trump economic plan. Cut taxes for American workers and American families. Cut taxes for businesses that are hiring and building companies in the United States of America, but penalize companies and countries that are shipping jobs overseas. That's the heart of the economic proposal. And I think what President Trump is saying is that when we bring in this additional revenue with higher economic growth, we're going to be able to provide paid family leave.
I got that
child
stat
care
for you.
options that
It's
are
in Messenger.
and workable for a lot of American families.
Can you clarify how that will solve the child care
Oh
shortage?
yeah, that's
Well,
the
because,
one.
as Tim said, a lot of the child care shortage is we just don't have enough resources going into the multiple people who could be providing family care options. And we're going to have to, unfortunately, look, we're going to have to spend more money. We're going to have to induce more people to want to provide child care options for American families, because the reason it's so expensive right now is because you've got way too few people providing this very essential service.
Thank
They're
you,
all
Senator.
greedy motherfuckers.
Governor
That's what it
Walz,
is.
Your ticket also has some child care tax credit proposals. Do you think Congress will agree to the $6,000 credit for newborns and $3,000 credit for children over the age of 6, as your campaign has promised? Is that realistic?
Well, if these members of Congress are listening to anybody, I can tell you, and this is the biggest issue. Everybody listening tonight knows. I mean, I'm sure they were shocked to hear it's not that expensive. And let's be clear, whether it's $5,000 or $6,000, that pays you about 3 or 4 months. Let's be clear of where we're at on this. It's because we got out of an imbalance on this.
No.
Paying people. I don't think Senator Vance and I are that far apart. I'm not opposed to what he's talking about on options. We've done scholarship types of things. I think we need to be open to making the case. But the issue here is, the question you asked is, you're not going to pay for it with these tariffs. That's just adding another $4,000 on the family and taking less.
Oh,
not only do
jeez.
they not get the money to pay for that, they're $4,000 in the hole. That's Wharton School. That's his alma mater. And so I think the issue here is, if those members of Congress, I can't believe they're not here. When I go to businesses, sure, they'll talk about taxes sometime, but they will lead with child care and they will lead with housing, because we know the problem is, especially in a state like Minnesota, we need more workers because our economy's growing, but we need the workforce.
Governor, thank you. We need
Yeah,
to-
illegals.
Nora?
Let's talk about the state of democracy. The top
They need the
issue
workforce,
for
but let's send more people home after
and inflation.
we have
For the
kids.
2020 election, President Trump's campaign and others.
And I'm not sure how that works. If I'm forced to pay
contesting the results.
an employee who has a child for 3 months or 2 months or 2 weeks, whatever the case may be, at the same time, I'm going to be forced to hire somebody else to fill that spot because I can't afford not to have somebody. Then when they come back, I have to fire the person I just hired for a month or something.
Nope.
And what happens if that person is better than the person that I had on family leave? I mean,
Tough
For
day to
small
fire a
business,
mom.
and would have asked the
New
states
mom's
to
tough
gonna
question.
have to go.
alternative electors.
Right?
That has been called unconstitutional and illegal. Would you again seek to challenge this year's election results, even
this is
if
the last
every
question of the last
governor
debate.
certifies the
Yeah.
results? I'll give you 2 minutes.
Well, Nora, first of all, I think that we're focused on the future. We need to figure out how to solve the
Attaboy.
inflation crisis caused by Kamala
There
Harris's
you go.
policies, make housing affordable, make groceries affordable, and that's what we're focused on. But I want to answer your question because you did ask it. Look, what President Trump has said is that there were problems in 2020, and my own belief is that we should fight about those issues, debate those issues peacefully in the public square, and that's all I've said, and that's all that Donald Trump has said. Remember, he said that on January the 6th, the protesters ought to protest peacefully. And on January the 20th, what happened? Joe Biden became the president. Donald Trump left the White House. And now, of course, unfortunately, we have all of the negative policies that have come from the Harris-Biden administration. I believe that we actually do have a threat to democracy in this country, but unfortunately, it's not the threat to democracy that Kamala Harris and Tim Walz want to talk about. It is the threat of censorship. It's Americans casting aside lifelong friendships because of disagreements over politics. It's big technology companies silencing their fellow citizens. And it's Kamala Harris saying that rather than debate and persuade her fellow Americans, she'd like to censor people who engage in misinformation. I think that is a much
answer.
bigger threat to democracy than anything that we've seen in this country in the last 4 years, in the last 40 years. Now, I'm really proud, especially given that I was raised by two lifelong blue-collar Democrats, to have the endorsement of Bobby Kennedy Jr. and Tulsi Gabbard, lifelong leaders in the Democratic coalition. And, of course, they don't agree with me and Donald Trump on every issue. We don't have to agree on every issue. But we're
Actually
united
makes sense.
behind
I
the
was raised by
basic
Democrats.
American First
He was
Amendment
at one point
principle
one of like
that
the
we ought
most
to debate our
left-leaning
differences. We ought to
Republicans there
argue
were.
about them. We ought to try to persuade our fellow Americans. Kamala Harris is engaged in censorship at an industrial scale. She did it during COVID. She's done it over a number of other issues.
Glad he brought up Kennedy because that's a great endorsement for them to have. People are very quiet about it, but at the end of the day, it's an extremely
Governor?
That's like
Big
an
deal.
8-10 point
Well, I've
swing.
enjoyed tonight's debate.
If
I think
like
there was a lot of
everyone
commonality
actually
here,
followed
I'm
RFK
sympathetic
and
and
when he
speaking on
endorsed
things, and I
them.
think I'm
Right.
with the senator. But
Me too, man.
There's one though that this one is troubling to me, and I say that because I think we need to tell the story. Donald Trump refused to acknowledge this, and the fact is that I don't think we can be the frog in the pot and let the boiling water go up. He was very clear. I mean, he lost this election, and he said he did. 140 police officers were beaten at the Capitol that day. Some with the American flag. Several later died, and it
Is
wasn't
that true?
just in there.
Yeah.
I've never
In
heard that
Minnesota,
before.
No.
a group gathered on the state capitol grounds in St. Paul, and said, we're marching to the governor's residence and there may be casualties. The only person there was my son and his dog, who was rushed out crying by state police. That issue, and Mike Pence standing there as they were chanting, hang Mike Pence. Mike Pence made the right decision. So, Senator, it was adjudicated over and over and over. I worked with kids long enough to know, and I said as a football coach, sometimes you really want to win, but the democracy is bigger than winning an election. You shake hands, and then you try and do everything you can to help the other side win. That's what.
Let's see if Kamala signs off on the results.
What does
All
that
right.
have to do with being a football coach? He said help the other team win. You're not trying to do that.
Well,
as a
yeah, because
football coach.
he was a shitty coach, and his team never won.
President's words matter. People hear that. So
That's
I think
I am not making that shit up either.
Oh, really?
shaking hands.
He was.
when we lose,
Oh,
being
he helped other coaches, but the team he coached was not a good team.
January 6th, first time in American history that a president or anyone tried to overturn a fair election and the peaceful transfer of power.
Didn't
And
try
here
to
we are,
overturn
4 years
it.
Later, in the same boat.
He asked
I will tell you
questions.
this,
Which
when
was
this is
fair
over,
because there was a lot
we
of
need to shake hands
fishy
this election,
moments
and the winner needs
caught
to be
on
the winner.
camera
This has
with
got to
random
stop. It's
ballots
tearing our
being
country
brought
apart.
in after hours and all of that.
Senator Vance, did you want to respond to that?
But who
Yeah, well,
knows?
look, Tim, first of all, it's really rich for Democratic leaders to say that Donald Trump is a unique threat to democracy when he peacefully gave over power on January the 20th, as we have done for 250 years in this country. We are going to shake hands after this debate and after this election. And of course, I hope that we win, and I think we're going to win. But if Tim Walz is the next vice president, he'll have my prayers, he'll have my best wishes, and he'll have my help whenever he wants it. But we have to remember that for years in this country, Democrats protested the results of elections. Hillary Clinton in 2016 said that Donald Trump had the election stolen.
Tim
by
looked
Vladimir
so
Putin because the Russians
shocked.
He's like, oh, he brought that shit up.
This has been going
I didn't hear that. Did he? Was that what happened?
I want to say that we need to
He
respect the
looks
results of the
so-
election. I'm
He
on
looks
board.
more.
And all the
shook
blue
now
cities
than
went
he
up in
has any other
flames,
moment.
including
Yep.
his.
The Republicans
Yep.
have had. I don't buy that.
Governor.
January 6th was not Facebook ads. And I think of revisionist history.
No, it was an inside job from Nancy Pelosi.
Without doubt.
We got to this point. But the issue was that happened.
What
Trump
was
didn't do it. And
Facebook
all I said,
ads?
there's
What is he
no place for this.
referencing?
It has massive repercussions. This idea that there's censorship to stop people from threatening to kill someone, threatening to do something, that's not censorship. Censorship is book banning. We've seen that. We've seen that brought up. I just think for everyone to
That's happened on both sides of the fence.
Yep.
Thank Senator Vance. I think this is the conversation they want to hear. And I think there's a lot of agreement. This is one that we are miles apart on. This was a threat to our democracy in a way that we had not seen. And it manifested itself because of Donald Trump's inability to say. He is still saying he didn't lose the election. I would just ask that. Did he lose the 2020 election?
No.
Tim, I'm focused on the future. Did Kamala Harris censor Americans from speaking their mind in the wake of the 2020 COVID situation?
That is a damning non-answer.
It's a damning non-answer for you to not talk about censorship. Obviously, Donald Trump and I think that there were problems in 2020. We've talked about it. I'm happy to talk about it further. But you guys attack us for not believing in democracy. The most sacred right under the United States democracy is the First Amendment. You yourself have said there's no First Amendment right to misinformation. Kamala Harris wants to use the
threatening or
power
hate
of
speech.
government and big tech to silence people from speaking their
That
minds.
is true.
That is a threat to democracy.
Absolutely
that will
true.
outlive this
And got caught.
Yeah,
I would like
first
Democrats and
Elon, but then
Republicans to both
Zuckerberg
reject
within the last
censorship.
month or
Let's
two came out and
persuade
said it
one
was
another.
true on
Let's
his
argue
end too
about
that
ideas,
the
and then let's come
DNC was trying to
together
pay
afterwards
and the
and
U.S.
get
government was
Right.
trying to pay to censor stuff on
That's the
Facebook and
test. That's the
Instagram.
Supreme Court test.
Yep.
Tim, fire in a crowded theater. You guys wanted to kick people off of Facebook for saying that toddlers shouldn't
Senator,
wear
the
masks.
governor does
That's
have the
not
floor.
Fire in a crowded theater. That is criticizing the policies of the government, which is the right of every American.
Senator, the governor does have the floor for 1 minute to
Please.
respond to you.
Yeah, well, I don't run Facebook. What I do know is I see a candidate out there who refused, and now again, and this I'm pretty shocked by this. He lost the election. This is not a debate. It's not anything anywhere other than in Donald Trump's world. Because look, when Mike Pence made that decision to certify that election, that's why Mike Pence isn't on this stage. What I'm concerned about is Where is the
That's not the only
firewall?
reason.
with
There's a
Donald
lot
Trump?
of stuff Pence and
Where is the
Trump didn't get
firewall
along
if
about.
He knows he could do anything, including taking an election, and his vice president's not going to stand to it. That's what we're asking you, America. Will you stand up? Will you keep your oath of office, even if the president doesn't? And I think Kamala Harris would agree. She wouldn't have picked me if she didn't think I would do that, because of course that's what we would do. So, America, I think you've got a really clear choice on this election of who's going to honor that democracy and who's going to honor Donald Trump.
Governor, your time is up. Thank you, gentlemen. We will be right back with both of our candidates. The CBS News vice presidential debate continues.
All right.
So the
Oh.
January 6th, inside job without a doubt.
Absolutely.
If I'm not mistaken, there's 3 levels of security gates that you have to go through, and at 81, there's a button they can press. The gate come down, threats over. Right?
Yep.
They never press that button. They
Nope.
let everybody through all 3 gates, and there you have it. At any point in time, any of the security guys, and these guys are not normal paid security that we'd buy for a bar. These guys are trained by the same force as the Secret Service that protect the president. So these are trained professionals
Yep.
that couldn't handle a small crowd. They were told to let that crowd in.
I mean, after the last like 2 months, being trained by the Secret Service doesn't mean what it meant 4 months ago.
Nope.
True, but at the time, President Trump was still a president, so those Secret Service people were still well trained.
Right.
They
So
were following orders.
let me jump on censorship real quick. So yeah, we all know that it was controlled by the DNC.
Yep.
It's just it was. I mean, they've admitted to it. But I'm also going to go to the fact that the First Amendment doesn't really cover Facebook, Twitter, Instagram.
It doesn't. It's a private institution.
Right. It's a closed platform. So all these people go, oh, it's my God-given right, blah, 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 to be on Facebook and say what I want to say. Absolutely not. It really doesn't.
It's a business.
You are
They can do
literally,
what they want.
you signed up and you agreed. I keep watching, so when they come back, we can go right back to them, okay?
Yeah, I'm watching.
It's bottom line is that they can do what they want, when they want, how they want, and if you don't like it, get off.
That's
Step
free
off.
enterprise. I mean,
Right. Because it's not like the government owns it and goes, this is the free thing that you can go out and say what you want to say, because that's not the way it works. It is just not. And I'm so sick and tired of hearing everybody. I mean, and this includes Fox, CNN, ABC, CBS, whatever. It doesn't matter. You know, they're all like, well, it's free speech. It's not free speech, folks. It's just not. And once you understand
But-
that, you're going to be a better person.
but when the government gets involved and forces Facebook and the other platforms to control the speech in their
Yeah.
favor,
Yeah.
that's a different story.
No,
Because now
totally
the business
agree.
is not doing
Yeah.
what the business wants to do. It's being pressured by the sitting government
Correct.
to censor in their favor because they know they can legally, because
I mean, that's where
it
gets
is a
into,
private
like,
business. They can do
freedom
what they
of the
want.
press. That's where it gets into freedom of the
That's right.
press and all of that.
Yeah, but
That's
you
part
know,
of the
Facebook-
First Amendment.
Should have been allowed to let the speech go if they chose to, but the government was pushing them not to let
which is wrong.
that speech go.
That is wrong.
Which is wrong.
But
They influenced
ultimately,
their decision.
yeah. But
Ultimately, they had a
ultimately,
decision to make.
right. But ultimately, you don't have free speech. Now, you want to build a
I agree.
website, and you want a free speech on your website, all you want, you do rail. Go for it. Have a grand old time. Say what you want to say, because look, you're paying to have a website. You're paying for your server. It's your domain. Say what you want to say. But on all these social media platforms, it's not. It's just not. I mean, I tell this to people all the time, and people look at me like I've got 3 damn heads.
Oh, well, I mean, I agree with you. I mean, look at the business I'm in. I have
Oh,
to have my own
yeah.
server to have a shopping cart and everything else, because the
Right.
mainstream commercial websites like BigCommerce and e-commerce and all those guys won't let me sell firearms online,
Right.
even though it is regulated federally and I'm legally allowed to do it within the guidelines of the federal rules. But they want nothing to do with it.
Right.
So therefore, I have to have my own software on my own servers, which makes it harder for marketing and everything else.
We
Right.
are back
Let's
to
go.
the debate. I'm going to go ahead and put it back on.
Cool.
Sounds good.
Thank you to CBS News, and most importantly, thank you to all of you. If you're still up and the folks who miss Dancing with Our Stars, I appreciate it. But look, the spirit of the democracy matters. It matters that you're here. And I'm as surprised as anybody of this coalition that Kamala Harris has built, from Bernie Sanders to Dick Cheney to Taylor Swift, and a whole bunch of folks in between there. And they don't all agree on everything, but they are truly optimistic people. They believe in a positive future of this country and one where our politics can be better than it is. And I have to tell you, that better than it is the sense of optimism that there can be an opportunity economy that works for everyone, not just to get by, but to get ahead. And the idea that freedom really means something. Not the freedom of government to be in your bedroom or exam room, but the freedom for you to make choices about yourself. Now, look, we all know who Donald Trump is. He's told us, and as Maya Angelou said, believe him when he told you that. His first inaugural address talked about American carnage, and then he spent 4 years trying to maybe do that. Senator Vance tonight made it clear he will stand with Donald Trump's agenda. He will continue to push down that road. Excuse me. Kamala Harris gives us a different option. Now, I'll have to tell you, I'm going to be careful about the quotes, but there's one that Senator
How's
Vance
it a
said that
different
does
option?
resonate with me. He said Donald
She's
Trump
already
makes
in.
the people I care about afraid. A lot of America feels that way. We don't need to be afraid. Franklin Roosevelt was right. All we have to fear is fear itself. Kamala Harris is bringing us a new way forward. She's bringing us a politics of joy. She's bringing real solutions for the middle class, and she's centering you at the heart of that. All the while asking everyone, join this movement, make your voices heard. Let's look for a new day where everybody gets that opportunity and everybody gets a chance to thrive. I humbly ask for your vote on November 5th for Kamala Harris.
Governor Walz.
Did he name drop in the
Senator
beginning
Vance,
with
your closing statement.
Taylor
Mr.
Swift.
Mrs.
Thank
Swift?
Governor Walz,
Yep.
you folks at CBS, and of course the American people for tuning in this evening. And one of the issues we didn't talk about was energy. And I remember when I was being raised by my grandmother, when she didn't have enough money to turn on the heat some nights because Ohio gets pretty cold at night and because money was often very tight.
Yes, it does.
And I believe, as a person who wants to be your next vice president, that we are a rich and prosperous enough country where every American, whether they're rich or poor, ought to be able to turn on their heat in the middle of a cold winter night. That's gotten more difficult thanks to Kamala Harris's energy policies. I believe that whether you're rich or poor, you ought to be able to afford a nice meal for your family. That's gotten harder because of Kamala Harris's policies. I believe that whether you're rich or poor, you ought to be able to afford to buy a house. You ought to be able to live in safe neighborhoods. You ought to not have your communities flooded with fentanyl. And that, too, has gotten harder with Kamala because of Kamala Harris's policies. Now, I've been in politics long enough to do what Kamala Harris does when she stands before the American people and says that on day one, she's going to work on all these challenges I just listed. She's been the vice president for 3.5 years. Day one was 1,400 days ago, and her policies have made these problems worse. Now, I believe that we have the most beautiful country in the world. I meet people on the campaign trail who can't afford food, but have the grace and generosity to ask me how I'm doing and to tell me they're praying for my family. What that has taught me is that we have the greatest country, the most beautiful country, the most incredible people anywhere in the world. But they're not going to be able to achieve their full dreams with the broken leadership that we have in Washington. They're not going to be able to live their American dream if we do the same thing that we've been doing for the last 3.5 years. We need change. We need a new direction. We need a president who has already done this once before and did it well. Please vote for Donald Trump. And whether you vote for me or vote for Tim Walz, I just want to say I'm so proud to be doing this, and I'm rooting for you. God bless you, and good night.
Senator Vance, thank you. And thank you both for participating in the only vice presidential debate of this election cycle. I'm Margaret Brennan.
And I'm Nora O'Donnell. And a reminder, there are just 35 days until Election Day. Please get out and vote. And for all of us here at CBS News, thank
Okay, I'll
you
take it off.
and good night.
Yep. Da-da-da-da, da-da-da-da, dun. So the one thing that she said, because she was in the working middle class, and she grew up working at McDonald's, and so she's going to make this an opportunistic country, right, for business. It's been an opportunity country forever. 'Cause
Forever. Anybody
you
wants to
make
start
your
a
own
business, man.
I think something that I'm surprised it was never brought up, and I think it's way more important than people realize, is the fixed pricing plan that Kamala has for the food price gouging. That dating back over 40 centuries, fixed pricing has only ever hurt an economy. And the last president to do it was Richard Nixon, and it caused inflation to go up by like 200 or 2,000% when he did his version of fixed pricing. So fixed pricing has never done anything positive in any nation. And we're seeing it now in other countries around the world trying it, and it's not working there. So I don't know why Kamala and Walz are turning back and reverting back to the idea that maybe price fixing is going to be the answer,
Well,
at least for inflation.
it goes back to the old, every time you talk to someone comes along and says, well, socialism works. And then everybody goes, well, no, it doesn't work. It's never worked anyway. And then the typical answer is, well, they just didn't do it right. I mean,
Socialism never works.
never. It's never worked. And price
Keeps the
price
middle
fix.
class in the middle class. And
Yeah.
yeah, and it gives the underprivileged just enough to survive. They want to keep voting for it to keep getting it because they can't afford to lose it.
Right.
But they never have the opportunity to do anything better because they're so fixated on taking what the government is willing to give them under socialism.
Right.
I mean, Russia did it. I mean, several countries did it, and it doesn't work. Free enterprise takes care of free enterprise.
Yeah, like price fixing, all it's ever done historically has caused increased black markets on just normal everyday items. Because then the people that are growing the food are still trying to sell the food for what it's worth. So they're just going to give a little bit of their stock over to the government for their fixed pricing. But the majority of it, they're trying to keep for themselves to either be able to feed themselves or try and make how much it's actually worth.
Well, if they keep us poor, their goal is to keep us poor and in the dark so they can control us. And that's why
Yes.
I don't know about anybody
Well, that's why
else.
they let the immigrants in.
Right. And I think everybody in this world, in this country, needs to start prepping, growing your own food, getting your own meat, and become less needy on the government and less needy on the price fixing. And here a little statistic: if 1 in every 4 houses in America, this is simple, had chickens, just 3 chickens, maybe 4, we would put an end to the egg industry.
Really?
Yep.
Yep.
I did not know that.
Yes. Because and that's why they're always constantly telling you it's hard to raise chickens or there's a bird flu or blah 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 blah. Nope. And you know what? You don't even have to have chickens. Have ducks. They're more hardy.
Oh God, ducks.
They're hardier. Their eggs are better, and they're bigger. And then when it all comes down to it, you can eat them, and they last longer. So
They're dirtier and
I'm
make
not
more of a
saying they're
mess.
not.
They destroy a lot more stuff.
But
My
it's-
buddy's farm, he's got chickens and ducks, and
yeah.
he gets rid of the ducks quickly. He hates
Quickly.
when people donate ducks
Oh God.
because
After Jeremy
Get
wanted
some
to
fat and then eat some.
after Jeremy brought up the immigration, I just really want to quick to John, since you found the statistic map that I was talking about earlier. I just
Yep.
want to quickly show just how much of an increase there is. Like 2019, 2020. 2019, there is actually a little increase, which I actually found very interesting. But you can see how much it goes up just as soon as that, just as soon as the
Biden
president
administration
switched
takes
out.
over.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just
I mean, that's-
actually crazy.
That's crazy, So, I don't know.
And they're all
I
getting
know is-
paid to be here.
Yeah. So my new retirement plan is I'm going to go to Mexico and come across
And come back.
and go. I'm illegal. I need money. I need
Yeah,
housing.
change your name and
Yeah. And see. So here's another thing too. This is what you have to go dig deep in this. So that $25,000 that Kamala Harris wants to give everybody for housing. What no one understands when they go in there and start reading inside of it, the qualifications are crazy. So if you're out there and go, oh well, Kamala's going to give me $25,000, I'm going to go get a house. Wrong. The qualification list is so stringent, you won't ever get the money.
Really?
Nope. And the other thing is that money is really it's going to be earmarked for illegal immigrants, not Americans.
yes.
And that's the problem. So, and then the $50,000 to start a business, it's not money, it's a tax credit. So, they're not going to give you 50 grand. They're going to go, okay, we'll go start it. In your first year, we're going to give you $50,000 for the tax credit. Because Jeremy knows this, I know this. You're not going to start a business for 20 grand. You're the minute you really go and you start a business, you're $100,000 to $200,000 out the gate with inventory, location, marketing, business, getting it started. I went back and looked at two of my other businesses, and the amount of money that I actually went in for the first 90 days was stupid. Way more than 100 grand. And so it's just a tax credit. And actually the money for, I think if I'm right, the money for the housing, the 25 is not cash either.
Really?
It's to help
Can
you
I-
get in.
I honestly thought they were going to.
Can I wait 5 years?
Can I wait 5 years?
Well, that's what they want you to think. That's what their
Yep.
plan is. And I would enjoy a $50,000 tax break 5 years after I open my business,
Right,
not the first 5 years, because the first 5 years nobody makes any money. I don't need that tax credit.
right.
I need that tax credit when things are going good and I'm making money.
Yeah.
And that's
Well, that's
5
when the
years,
government
6 years,
wants it.
7. Right. I mean, the first 5 years, I'm not making enough money to have a $50,000 tax credit. I mean, it'd be great if I was, but realistically, very few businesses make any money the first, 2 years?
Yeah.
3 years, if they're lucky?
3 years, you're
mean, so
typically
no,
always negative. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, unless you get super lucky and you're doing something that no one else, you're in what we call a blue ocean.
Right.
Well, yeah. Okay. But
Yeah.
half the time though, when you're in that blue ocean, people don't understand what you're doing.
That's true.
That's right.
Yeah. Because
And it takes
I
money
remember,
to get them to understand what you're
Yep.
doing.
Well, that or the one other person that might understand it might try and run off and start
Do
his own
exactly what
business
you're
and
doing.
Copy it. Yeah.
yeah. I remember when we opened Tampa Bay Multimedia, and we were the first streamers in Florida, pretty much. I mean, one of the first three in Florida, probably the first in Tampa Bay that were truly. We weren't selling the equipment; we were buying the equipment. We were actually streaming. When I told people that we were going to stream live video onto your computer, your phone, and everything else, they looked at me like I was a dum-dum.
You're crazy.
They're like, "What are you talking about?" And then I was talking about podcasts, and people are like, "Tell's a podcast." And I'm like, yeah, that's going to be the future. I'm just telling you right now. We were doing it in 05, and people literally thought we were stupid as hell. They're like, you're an idiot. I'm like, okay. All right. Anyway, hey, everybody home, thanks for watching. I was just looking at the numbers. We did way better on the website than we did on Facebook, of course, and YouTube. But it's all right. You know what? We did it. And we're going to probably start doing way more of these. We appreciate everybody watching. Jeremy, thank you for coming on. Austin, great
No
job
problem.
in
Thank you for having
switching and
me.
getting it all done. And you know what? We'll talk to everybody later.
Have a good one.
Sounds good. Thank you. Good night, everybody.
Good night.